I was in the kitchen of my childhood home, phone in hand, staring at the bank transfer confirmation. £15,000 was gone, all for the perfect family Christmas my parents had begged me to organise. That's when I heard them. Through the ajar dining room door, my mother's voice cut through the silence. "Don't worry, the family eats first. She'll get whatever is left over." My father chuckled. "She's paying for it anyway. Might as well make sure everyone else enjoys it." 32 guests, a five-course banquet, imported wines, custom decorations, and I was supposed to eat the leftovers. Something inside me shattered. I didn't confront them, I didn't scream. I simply walked out of that house and made 3 phone calls that would ruin their perfect holiday. Christmas night came and went with no turkey, no guests, no daughter to serve a family that saw her as nothing more than a checkbook. What I did instead was send them a photograph, just one. In less than an hour, 99 missed calls, dozens of furious texts, my mother sobbing into voicemails, my father threatening legal action. But here's what they didn't know. What nobody knew was that this was just the beginning. What I'm about to tell you isn't just about a cancelled dinner party. It's about the moment I realized my entire life had been a lie, and how one act of revenge exposed secrets that destroyed my family forever. Bear with me. By the end of this story, you'll understand why that single photograph was worth every penny, and so much more. My name is Eleanor Hartwell. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my life, I was the daughter no one remembered was in the room. I work as a medical billing coordinator in London, a steady, reliable, invisible job for an invisible woman. But this story isn't about my job. It's about the £15,000 I spent trying to buy something you should never have to buy, a place in your own family. Growing up in Cedar Falls, Berkshire, there were always 2 daughters in the Hartwell house, but only one ever seemed to matter. My sister Vanessa was 3 years younger than me and blessed with what my mother called angel hair, blonde curls that caught the light, just so a smile that made people stop and stare, and a personality that filled every room she entered. I had mousy brown hair that never behaved, a face my father once described as sensible, and a tendency to fade into the background of every family photo. When I was 16, my dad's construction business went through a rough patch. Money got tight, really tight. I remember the night my parents sat us down at the kitchen table, the harsh overhead light casting sharp shadows on my mother's worried face. "We need everyone to pull together," my father said, his calloused hands clasped in front of him. What that meant, I soon realized, was that I needed to pull myself together. Vanessa was 13, in the middle of her crucial developmental years, trying out for the school musical and the cheerleading squad. She needed to focus on building her future. That weekend, I got a job at the local Greasy Spoon Cafe. For the next 6 years, through the rest of sixth form and all 4 years of college, I worked 2 jobs. Mornings at the cafe, evenings at the supermarket, and every spare hour was spent on my coursework. I finished my health administration degree with exactly £400 in my bank account. 3 years later, Vanessa graduated from sixth form with a modelling portfolio my parents had paid a professional photographer £3,000 to create. I bought my own graduation dress from a charity shop. She wore a Vera Wang dress. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that parents love their children equally, just in different ways. Vanessa needed more support because she was reaching for something special. My needs were simpler. I was capable, independent, strong. These were the lies I whispered to myself at night in my studio flat after I'd transferred another £500 home, because the roof was leaking, or the car needed repairs, or Vanessa needed new headshots. For 22 years, I sent money home. 22 years of being the emergency contact, the reliable one, the daughter who showed up when called and never complained. When my father had a heart attack 5 years ago, I drove 7.5 hours through a snowstorm to be at the hospital. Vanessa was in Marbella for a photo shoot and sent flowers. My mother squeezed my hand once in the waiting room and said, "Thank God you're here." But she spent the rest of the week on the phone with Vanessa, reassuring her that she didn't need to cut her trip short. Family gatherings became a special kind of torture that I endured with a smile plastered on my face. Sunday roasts where I'd help cook, but eat at the extra card table in the living room while Vanessa held court at the main table. Christmas mornings, where my practical gifts, warm slippers for Mum, a tool set for Dad, were opened and quickly put aside while Vanessa's expensive perfume and designer scarves were marvelled at for 20 minutes. Birthday parties, where I was thanked for bringing the cake I'd baked myself, and then watched everyone sing to Vanessa, whose birthday was 6 months away, because my mother insisted we celebrate early in case she couldn't make it on the day. I became a ghost in my own family present, but unseen necessary but never valued. I stood at the back of photographs, smiled through toasts that never mentioned my name. I laughed at jokes about how different my sister and I were, how she got the looks and I got the brains as if it were a fair trade, as if one was as good as the other. And the worst part, I accepted it. I convinced myself this was normal, that families just work differently, that love doesn't always look the way you expect it to, that my value wasn't measured in attention or acknowledgement, but in service and sacrifice, that eventually one day they would see me, really see me, and all those years of invisibility would suddenly make sense. But I was wrong. Love isn't supposed to make you invisible. Vanessa's real name isn't Vanessa. It's Danielle. I don't know why I've been calling her Vanessa in my head all these years. Maybe because the real Danielle was always too golden, too perfect, too much for reality to contain. Danielle Marie Hartwell, named after our grandmother, who left her a pearl necklace worth more than my first car. I got Grandma's recipe box. The symbolism wasn't lost on me even at 12. Danielle is 32 now, and still beautiful in that effortless way that makes other women subconsciously touch their own hair when she enters a room. For the last 10 years, she's drifted through 7 different jobs, if you can call them that. Receptionist at a yoga studio, social media manager for a friend's boutique that folded after 6 months, a life coach for exactly 3 weeks before she decided it was too emotionally draining. Currently, she calls herself a wellness consultant, which means she posts inspirational quotes on Instagram and occasionally convinces wealthy women to buy overpriced vitamins. My parents think she's finding herself exploring her passions, taking the time to discover her purpose. During the 6 years I spent getting my master's in health administration while working full-time, my father asked me if I was sure I wanted to be stuck in an office forever. I graduated with honors. They sent me a card. It arrived 4 days late, signed with just their first names, as if I were a distant cousin they barely knew. Danielle's graduation from college, a 3-year journey to complete a 2-year program in general studies, was celebrated with a garden party for 60 people. Custom cake with her face on it, steaks, balloons, a champagne toast, a slideshow set to inspiring music. I helped set up the tables, took the photos, and cleaned up afterwards, while everyone told her how bright her future was. When Danielle needed money for a flat deposit 5 years ago, my parents gave her £2,500 without a second thought. When I needed the same thing at 22, I worked double shifts for 3 months and slept on a friend's sofa until I could afford it on my own. No one offered. I didn't ask. Even then, I knew not to. The pattern was so established, so predictable, that I'd stopped noticing it in the same way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator. It was just background noise in my life. Danielle needs, Danielle gets. Eleanor manages, Eleanor perseveres. It was just how our family worked, the unspoken rules we all followed. Then October came, October 15th to be exact. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a text from my mum. "Call me when you can. Exciting news. Three exclamation marks. My mother rarely used one. I called on my lunch break. Before I could even speak, she was shrieking down the phone. She said yes. Well, technically, he asked, and she said yes. But you know what I mean. Eleanor, your sister's engaged. Danielle had been dating Marcus for 2 years. 40 divorced, no kids, stable, successful, exactly the kind of man my parents had always hoped one of their daughters would marry. The fact that it was Danielle who'd landed him seemed to prove something they'd always believed. Beauty and charm would eventually win out over everything else, including a steady career and financial independence. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of wedding talk. Every phone call revolved around venues, guest lists, and color palettes. The details changed daily, but my mother absorbed each new development with an almost saintly patience. I listened, I congratulated, I waited for the inevitable request for money. It never came. Instead, in mid-November, my mother sighed. Everything is just so expensive. The venues alone are thousands and thousands. And Danielle wants it to be perfect. This is her day. She deserves perfect. A week later, my father called a rare occurrence. Your mother's losing sleep over this wedding. We're thinking of taking out a small loan. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case something happens to us and you inherit debt instead of assets. He laughed as if it were a joke. I didn't. They would rather go into debt than ask me for help. The daughter with £80,000 in savings, no mortgage, no car payments, no debt of her own. Asking me would mean admitting they needed me for something other than emergency bailouts. It would mean treating me like a real member of the family instead of a convenient cash machine. That's when the idea started to form. It wasn't revenge yet, not quite. Just a thought. What if I gave them the perfect family Christmas? What if I showed them, once and for all, that I could provide something Danielle never could? What if I stopped waiting for them to ask and just took the initiative, proved my worth in a way they couldn't ignore? I was about to give them a Christmas they'd never forget. I just didn't know I'd be the one to regret it. The idea hit me on a Tuesday night in late November as I was sitting alone eating leftover Chinese and scrolling through my Facebook feed, reading my mother's posts about the stress of wedding planning. What if I just solved all their problems at once? What if I gave them a Christmas so spectacular that they would finally have to see me as something more than a backup plan? I started researching that same night. The Gramercy Hotel had a private dining room with floor-to-ceiling windows and crystal chandeliers, pure elegance. Higher fee, £3,500. I didn't hesitate. By Thursday, I had the whole thing planned. Catering from Sebastian's, the French restaurant my parents always talked about but deemed too expensive. Herb-crusted prime rib lobster bisque, truffle-oiled vegetables, molten chocolate lava cakes, professional waiters, a premium wine. Pairing fresh floral centerpieces, a photographer and a classical string quartet. The total £15,000. £15,000 for one perfect night, for 28 family members and a few close friends, for the chance finally to be the daughter who gave them something they couldn't ignore. I called my mother on Friday morning before I could lose my nerve. My hands were shaking. Mum, I've had an idea for Christmas, something special. I'd like to host a family party this year. Something really nice. On me, my gift to everyone. A long pause. Then her voice higher, excited. Eleanor, that's incredibly generous. Are you sure that sounds expensive? I'm sure. I want to do this. Let me do this for us. Well, if you're sure, your father and I have been so stressed about the wedding costs. This would be such a relief. Oh, Eleanor, thank you. Thank you so much. She didn't protest once, just accepted. That immediate acceptance should have been my first warning. I sent the bank transfer that afternoon. £15,000 gone in one go with the memo line for our family Christmas celebration. My mother called back less than an hour later, crying, "I can't believe you did this. This is the most generous thing anyone has ever done for us. We're going to make this the most beautiful Christmas our family has ever had." Our family, she said that too. I saved that voicemail and listened to it 3 times, letting her gratitude wash over me for every slight, every overlooked moment. In the following weeks, I sent detailed emails, menus, dietary restrictions, seating arrangements, spreadsheets. Her replies were brief. "Sounds great. We'll handle the details. Don't you worry about a thing." When I asked for a final head count, 32, including us. "Stop worrying. We just want you to relax and enjoy yourself." Relax and enjoy. The words sounded like permission to hope. I bought a new dress, dark green velvet. I got my hair done, new heels. I wanted to look like I belonged. The first week of December, I called 3 times. Each call went to voicemail. I'd get a text hours later, busy, swamped. I sent wine options. Reply: "Whatever you think is best." Question about dessert presentation. Reply: "Don't worry about it. Seating chart. Dietary restrictions." Family photos, always don't worry about it. Each reply was like a door closing in my face. 10 days before Christmas, I drove to Cedar Falls unannounced, carrying fresh biscuits. Their cars were there, Danielle's too. Warm, golden light. My mother opened the door. The look on her face wasn't joy, it was panic, quickly masked. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" I thought I'd help with the planning. "I brought biscuits." She didn't move from the doorway. Behind her, a flash of Danielle's blonde hair disappeared around a corner. A laptop snapped shut. "Now's not a good time. I can wait or help." "No, no. We're just so busy. Why don't you come back and we'll chat next week?" She took the biscuits, thanked me with a strained smile, and closed the door. I stood on the porch, staring at the painted wood, listening to the muffled, urgent voices start up again inside. 3 days before Christmas, I baked Grandma's sugar biscuits, 4 dozen perfect stars and trees and bells, and drove back again unannounced. Driveway full, Aunt Karen, Uncle John. Another planning meeting I wasn't invited to. The front door was unlocked. I slipped inside quietly. Laughter from the kitchen, my mother's voice bright in a way it rarely was with me. Then I heard my name, not as a greeting, but in the middle of a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I froze 2 steps from the door. "So Eleanor sits here," Aunt Karen said. Paper rustled, clearly the seating chart. "No, no," my mother replied, patient, explanatory. "The family sits at the main table, Danielle, Marcus, you and John, Robert and Linda. Prime spots by the windows. They'll serve that table first, the best cuts of meat, everything beautifully presented." "And Eleanor?" Aunt Karen asked again, confused. My mother gave a light, dismissive laugh. "Eleanor will be at the side table with the cousins and the Endersons. She'll be served after everyone at the main table has finished. With whatever's left, she won't mind. She never does." The world seemed to tilt. I leaned against the wall, the tins of biscuits threatening to slip. "That's awful," Danielle said, laughing as she spoke. "I mean, yes, she never complains, but still it's a bit cruel. It's practical," my father cut in, matter of fact. "The main table is for the most important people, the ones everyone wants to sit with. Eleanor is just happy to be included. She always has been." "Remember her college graduation," Danielle added, amused. "She didn't even care that we couldn't make it." "Because you were at my regional cheerleading championships," my mother finished. "Exactly," said my mother. "Eleanor understands the family dynamic. She knows her place. And honestly, she's paying for the whole thing anyway. The least she can do is let us organize it how we want. It's not like she'll say anything." When has Eleanor ever complained about anything? "Never," my father and Danielle said in unison. Then they all laughed together. So that's settled. My mother's voice became firm, businesslike. The main table gets served first generous portions. Eleanor's table gets served last with whatever's left, and we'll make sure the photographer focuses on the main table for the official family photos. Eleanor can be in the group shots, obviously, but she doesn't need to be at the center of anything. I was not to be at the center of the dinner. I was paying for the party I financed with £15,000 and weeks of hopeful planning. I would be relegated to the extra table eating leftovers after my family had their fill, invisible, even at my own event. I backed away from the door one silent step at a time. My hands were trembling so badly that the biscuit tins rattled softly against each other. I made it to the front door, opened it carefully, and slipped out. The cold December air hit my face like a slap, but I barely felt it. I walked to the porch steps and placed the biscuit tins down, carefully arranging them with precision in a perfect row, like an offering at an altar to gods who had already decided I was unworthy. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away from that house, from those voices, from the family that had just confirmed what a small, quiet part of me had always known. I would never be enough. No amount of money, no grand gesture, no years of sacrifice would ever make them see me as anything other than the reliable, invisible daughter they could count on to accept whatever scraps they offered. The drive home was 90 minutes. I don't remember a single mile of it. My mind was blank, wiped clean by shock and by something else. Something cold and sharp and clean as a blade. I didn't cry that night. I planned. Discovery. I learned requires you to be awake, and sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word I'd overheard, feeling them carve deeper grooves into my chest with each repetition. At midnight, I gave up on rest and moved to the sofa. At 1 a.m., I made tea. I didn't drink. By 2 a.m., I found myself sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at my bank statement for no particular reason, just because it was something to look at, something concrete and real, when everything else felt like it was dissolving. The bank transfer was still there in my transaction history. £15,000 sent on the 21st of November. I'd looked at this confirmation dozens of times over the last month, each time with a pleasant hum of anticipation. Now I stared at a reference number, a string of digits that had never meant anything to me before. On an impulse, I clicked for the detailed transaction information, date, time, amount, and the receiving account number. A number I didn't recognize because I'd never had a reason to memorize my parents' bank details. Something tickled at the back of my mind. A pinprick of wrongness I couldn't quite place. I looked up my bank's customer service information. They had a 24-hour line for account inquiries. At 2:15 a.m., with my hands shaking and my heart beating too fast, I called. The agent who answered sounded professionally cheerful despite the hour. I explained that I needed information on a bank transfer, gave her my banking details, and verified my identity through a series of security questions. I need to know if there were any subsequent transfers from the receiving account after my transfer went through. I said, "Is that something you can check?" There was typing. A pause. More typing. I can see that the receiving account initiated an outgoing wire transfer on the same day your funds arrived. Ma'am. November 21st. However, I can only see that the transfer happened, not where it went. You would need to contact the account holder for that information. The same day my money had hit my parents' account and gone straight back out again within hours, maybe minutes. I thanked the representative and hung up, my mind racing. Where did the money go? Did they pay the deposit for the Christmas dinner as they'd promised, or had something else happened to it? At 2:45 a.m., I did something I should have done weeks ago. I called the Gramercy Hotel. A young man answered on the third ring, sounding bored until I explained I needed to confirm a reservation for a private dinner on December 25th. "What's the name on the reservation?" he asked. "Hartwell. Richard or Susan Hartwell." The sound of typing, a pause that stretched too long. "I don't have any reservation under that name for Christmas Day. Our main dining room is open for regular service, but there are no private events booked." My mouth went dry. "Could you check if a reservation was made and then cancelled?" More typing. No cancellations under that name either. "Are you sure about the date?" I thanked him and ended the call, staring at my phone as if it could offer some explanation that made sense. No reservation, no deposit, no Christmas dinner. Where had my £15,000 gone? I knew someone who might be able to help. Melissa Shaw, a friend from college who'd become an event planner, someone who knew every venue in the London area and had contacts all over the southeast. We hadn't spoken in months, but we had the kind of friendship where we could pick up right where we left off. I texted her, knowing she wouldn't see it until morning, but needing to put the question out into the universe. "Need to track down a wedding venue deposit. Wedding is on Valentine's Day. Bride's name, Danielle Hartwell. Any idea how I can search venue bookings?" I didn't expect a reply before dawn, but my phone buzzed 10 minutes later. Awake with a sick toddler. "Why are you awake? And why are you investigating your sister's wedding?" I called her and explained everything in a rushed whisper. The Christmas dinner, the money, the overheard conversation, the vanished hotel booking. Melissa listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she was silent for a long moment. "Give me 20 minutes, she said. "Finally, I know people." Those 20 minutes felt like hours. I paced my flat, made more tea, and stared out the window at the sleeping city. When Melissa called back, her voice was soft in a way that told me the news was bad before she even spoke. "The Ashworth estate," she said. "Valentine's Day next year." A £15,000 deposit was made on November 21st in the name of Danielle Marie Hartwell. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry." The Ashworth estate, one of the most exclusive wedding venues in the county, the kind of place that required deposits a year in advance, the kind of place my parents could never afford on their own, the kind of place Danielle had probably been dreaming of since Marcus proposed. My £15,000. My Christmas celebration. My desperate attempt to finally be seen by my family. It had never been for Christmas. My mother's tears hadn't been gratitude for a family dinner. They'd been relief that Danielle's wedding venue was secured. My father's pride hadn't been in my generosity. It had been satisfaction that they'd solved their problem without having to consult me directly, without having to admit what they were really doing. They had taken my money under false pretenses. They'd let me believe I was funding a family party while siphoning every penny towards their golden child's wedding. And then to add cruelty to the theft, they'd planned to serve me leftovers at a Christmas dinner that didn't actually exist. One they were apparently going to cobble together with whatever money they could scrape up, while I believed my £15,000 was creating something beautiful for all of us. The wedding stress my mother had mentioned, the tears on the phone, the immediate acceptance of my offer with no pushback on the price. It all made perfect, horrible sense now. I hadn't been investing in family bonding. I'd been bankrolling Danielle's dream wedding while my family planned to humiliate me at a budget Christmas dinner. What made me think my grand gesture had created something special? I sat at my kitchen table as the dawn started to streak the windows grey. My laptop was still open. My bank account still showed that wire transfer, that reference number that had led me down this rabbit hole of betrayal. My phone read 3:37 a.m. In less than 72 hours, I was supposed to show up at my parents' house for a Christmas dinner. I had financed, eat leftovers at a side table, and smile through the whole thing like the good, invisible daughter they'd always known me to be. But that daughter had died somewhere around 2 a.m., murdered by transaction records, a helpful event planner, and the crushing weight of a truth I could no longer deny. They hadn't stolen Christmas, they had sold it, and I was about to buy it back. The first thing I did as the sun came up was make coffee, real coffee, strong and black, the kind that would keep me sharp for what came next. Because what came next required precision, careful planning, and absolute secrecy. My family had spent weeks orchestrating my humiliation. I would spend the next 3 days orchestrating something else entirely. I went to my laptop and opened my email, scrolling back until I found what I needed from November. There it was, my initial inquiry to the Gramercy Hotel, sent from my personal email address under my name. The event coordinator's reply addressed to me. The subsequent questions I'd asked about capacity menu options and availability. Every interaction had been with me under my name from my email account. My parents had never contacted the hotel. They'd never made a booking because they'd never intended to. They'd taken my money and run, assuming I'd show up at Christmas to whatever cheap dinner they'd cobbled together, none the wiser about where my £15,000 had gone. But in their rush to fund Danielle's wedding, they had overlooked something crucial. I was the one who had done all the initial legwork. I was the one who had the paper trail. The event, if it existed in any official record, existed under my name. At 7 a.m., I called the Gramercy Hotel. A different person answered this one, professional and alert. "I need to book a private dining room for Christmas Day," I said. "I know it's last minute, but do you have any availability?" "Let me check." A pause. The sound of typing. "We do have the drawing room available. It's our smaller private space seating up to 20 guests. Would that work for you?" 20 guests? Not the 32 my parents had mentioned on the guest list, they never showed me, but enough for the people who actually mattered, the ones I was about to peel away from my parents' charade. "Perfect," I said. "I'll take it." I spent the next hour on the phone, recreating the Christmas dinner I had originally envisioned. Sebastian's could still provide the catering, though the menu would be scaled down for a smaller group. The florist still had centerpieces available. The quartet was booked elsewhere, but a talented pianist was available and eager for the work. By 9 a.m., I had a complete, elegant Christmas dinner for 20 people planned at the Gramercy Hotel, all contracted and confirmed under my name, with the deposits paid on my credit card. Next came the delicate part. I needed to invite the family members who mattered to me without alerting my parents, Danielle or Marcus. I started with my favourite Aunt Linda, my father's older sister, who'd always been kind to me in a distracted, peripheral way. I sent her a text, change of plans for Christmas dinner, new venue, new time. "Can I call you?" She replied within minutes. When I called, I kept my voice light and conspiratorial. "I'm planning a surprise," I told her, which wasn't a complete lie. "The dinner is moving, but I need you to keep it an absolute secret from Mum, Dad, and Danielle. Can you do that?" Linda, who loved intrigue almost as much as she loved family drama, agreed immediately. "What's the new venue?" I gave her. The details then made her promise again not to tell anyone except her husband Robert. "Tell him to keep it secret too. This is important, Aunt Linda. I'm trying to do something special, and I need everyone's cooperation," she promised. I believed her mostly because Linda had never been particularly close to my mother, and would likely relish being part of a secret that excluded her. I repeated this process 15 more times. Uncle Robert, cousin Jennifer and her husband, cousin Michael, the Endersons, longtime family friends who had always been kind to me, my mother's sister Karen, who I caught just as she was leaving for work. Each conversation followed the same pattern change of plans, new venue, absolute secrecy required. "This is a surprise," Most people asked questions. I deflected with vague promises of making Christmas special, of wanting to do something different this year. Some sounded suspicious, but all of them agreed to come, and more importantly, to stay quiet. By noon on December 22nd, I had 20 confirmed guests for Christmas dinner at a venue my parents didn't know about. The real dinner, the one with real food and real bookings, and real care put into every detail. The dinner I had originally wanted to create, now reserved for people who would at least notice I was in the room. The hardest part was saying nothing. My mother called that afternoon, her voice falsely cheerful. "Just checking you're still coming on Christmas at 6 p.m., right?" "I'll be there," I said. And it wasn't technically a lie. I would be somewhere on Christmas at 6 p.m., just not where she expected. Wonderful. We've got everything planned. It's going to be such a special night. The way she said special sent a shiver down my spine. Special for whom special? Because they could serve me leftovers while congratulating themselves on their own cleverness. "I'm looking forward to it," I said, which also wasn't technically a lie. I was looking forward to Christmas, just not the version she was picturing. Over the next 2 days, I fielded 3 more calls from my mother, 2 from my father, and 1 from Danielle. Each time I confirmed my attendance, asked no questions about the details, and played the part of the dutiful, uncomplaining daughter. My father even said, "We really appreciate you doing this, Eleanor. Your mother's so excited to have the family together." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. "I'm excited too," I managed to say. On Christmas Eve, my mother sent a text to a family group chat I had never seen, but which apparently existed. "Tomorrow at 6, can't wait to celebrate with everyone." My phone remained silent. No one replied because everyone who received that text had already been contacted by me personally with different information. They all knew the secret now. They had all sworn to silence. They were all planning to show up at the Gramercy Hotel instead of my parents' house. I wondered if my mother noticed the silence, the lack of enthusiastic replies she was probably expecting. I wondered if it made her nervous, if it made her question anything. Probably not. She was too busy preparing for her triumph, too focused on the dinner she thought she was hosting with my money. That night, I laid out my green velvet dress, the one I'd bought for a celebration that was after all going to happen, just not in the way anyone expected. I set my alarm and went to bed early, sleeping soundly for the first time in days. When I woke up on Christmas morning, I felt calm, clear. Ready, let's see how they enjoy Christmas dinner without any guests or their generous benefactor. Christmas morning dawned crisp and cold, with snow falling in lazy spirals outside my flat window. I made coffee, sat on my sofa in my pajamas, and browsed social media with a detached curiosity, wondering what kind of performance my family would put on today. I didn't have to wait long. Danielle had posted at 7 a.m. a photo of herself in silk pajamas, holding a glass of champagne and flashing her engagement ring. The caption read, "Christmas morning bubbles. Can't wait for the amazing party my family is putting on tonight. Feeling so blessed and grateful." 3 heart emojis. 147 likes in the first hour. The comments began to roll in as expected. "So gorgeous. So jealous. Wish I was there." One friend named Ashley wrote, "Wait, you're having a Christmas party, can I come?" Danielle's reply appeared within minutes. "Just close family this year. An intimate celebration, but thank you, babe." Intimate celebration funded by the sister she never thanked, planned without the input of the person who made it possible, designed to put that person in her place, while everyone else enjoyed premium treatment. I took a screenshot of the post and saved it to a folder on my phone I'd simply labeled evidence, though I wasn't sure yet what I would do with it. At 9 a.m., my mother called. I let it ring twice before answering so I wouldn't seem too eager. "Merry Christmas, dear." Her voice was effervescent, bubbling with an excitement I rarely heard directed at me. "Just wanted to check you're still coming at 6, right?" "Of course," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Do you need me to bring anything?" "No, no. Everything's under control." "Everything? Your father's been up since 5 a.m. prepping. We want it to be perfect. Perfect for everyone but me." She didn't add that part. "We're just so excited to have the whole family together." "The whole family except for the daughter you plan to humiliate," I thought. I said out loud. "I'm excited too." After I hung up, I opened Instagram again and saw that my mother had also posted something. A photo of their dining table extended to its full length, covered with a red tablecloth. The plates were mismatched but clean, with paper napkins folded beside them. For a cobbled-together on-a-budget effort, it looked festive enough. Nothing like the elegant dinner I had envisioned. Nothing worth £15,000. The caption read, "Final preparations for tonight's family feast. So much love has gone into making this special." The comments were full of heart emojis and can't wait messages from relatives I had personally contacted with different information. They were all in on it now, all playing along, waiting to see what would happen when they didn't show up at my parents' house. At noon, my phone rang again. This time it was my father, which was unusual enough to make my heart skip a beat. "Eleanor." His voice was gruff but strangely affectionate. "Just wanted to say, we appreciate you doing this, making this Christmas possible for everyone. Your mother's been cooking all morning. The house smells amazing." I closed my eyes, picturing him in their kitchen, genuinely believing he was about to pull off a successful family dinner. A part of me almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered his words from the week before. "She's just happy to be included. She always has been." "I'm happy to help," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We've got the seating all sorted. A special table for the main family right by the window where the light is best for pictures. You know how your mother loves to document everything." He chuckled. I marveled at the gall he had in revealing this. "Well, see you at 6. After he hung up, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing the conversation. They were still going through with it, still planning to seat me at the secondary table, still setting up their hierarchy of importance, still preparing to serve me last and least. They truly believed I would show up, accept my designated place, and never question any of it. I spent the afternoon wrapping presents not for my parents, not for Danielle. I'd stopped at a pharmacy on the 23rd of December and bought them generic candles and a box of chocolates, the kind of thoughtless gift that matched their thoughtless treatment of me. But for Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert, for my cousins, for the Endersons, I had chosen carefully books I knew they'd love, gift cards to their favorite restaurants. Small, meaningful things that showed I paid attention to their lives, even when my own family didn't pay attention to mine. Each wrapped package felt like a small act of rebellion. These were the people who would be at my dinner tonight, who would eat the meal I had actually planned, who might just possibly see me as something more than invisible Eleanor. I didn't need their gratitude or acknowledgement. I just needed them to be there to witness what happened when you pushed the reliable daughter too far. At 4 p.m., the confirmation texts started rolling in. "Aunt Linda, we're on our way. So excited for the surprise cousin Jennifer just left the house. This is going to be interesting. The Endersons pulling up to the Gramercy now. Should we wait in the lobby?" I replied to each one with instructions to check in at the hotel, give my name, and settle into the room at 5 p.m. My phone was buzzing constantly with updates. Everyone was arriving. Everyone was in place. The pianist had started playing. The caterers were setting up. The dinner I had envisioned was finally happening, just without the people who had tried to steal it from me. At 5:30, my mother sent a text to the family group chat. Everyone should be arriving soon. We're so looking forward to seeing you all. I stared at the message, knowing that not a single person on that list was going to her house. They were all at my dinner, the real dinner, settling into their seats and accepting champagne from the waiters I had hired. I put on my green velvet dress, did my makeup with care, and took one last look at myself in the mirror. I looked different somehow, stronger, more present, less like a ghost, and more like a woman who had finally decided what mattered. At 5:45, I got in my car and started driving not towards Cedar Falls and my parents' house, but towards the Grand Meridian Hotel and the Christmas celebration I had a right to control. Christmas morning had arrived. I'd never been so ready to celebrate. I arrived at the Gramercy Hotel at 6:15 p.m., fashionably late to my own party. When I walked into the room, it was already buzzing with conversation and laughter. Aunt Linda saw me first and rushed over, giving me a genuinely warm hug. "Eleanor, this is beautiful. What's going on? Why all the secrecy?" "I'll explain everything soon," I promised, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Let's just enjoy the evening first." The room was exactly as I had pictured it. Crisp white tablecloths gleamed under soft lighting. The centerpieces were elegant arrangements of winter greens and white roses. The pianist played something classical and soft in the corner. Waiters moved efficiently among the guests, offering canapes and refilling drinks. This was the dinner I had planned, the celebration I had funded, finally happening the way it deserved to. Meanwhile, 15 miles away in Cedar Falls, my parents and sister were likely arriving at their venue. I had done my research on this part too. I'd called in another favor from Melissa, who knew the event coordinator at the Riverside Inn, the mid-range venue my parents had apparently booked after they took my money. For £500, the coordinator had agreed to set up an elaborate Christmas display in their private dining room. Lavish centerpieces borrowed from their high-end events, expensive-looking decorations, and even a few trays of exquisite-looking canapes on warmers. It was all designed to look like the £15,000 dinner my parents thought they were hosting. Everything except the guests. I imagined them walking in at 6 p.m. on the dot. My mother in her best dress, my father in his one good suit. Danielle and Marcus dressed to impress. I imagined their excitement as they took in the beautiful room, their satisfaction at having pulled off such an elegant event. I imagined them checking their watches as 6:15 came and went with no one appearing. 6:36:45. The confusion setting in, turning to concern, and then finally panic. At 6:52 p.m., my phone started to buzz. I'd left it in my handbag. On full volume, but tucked away where I wouldn't be tempted to look. I felt it hum against my hip, a persistent vibration that went on for 30 seconds before stopping and then starting again over and over. At 7 p.m., I stood and tapped a fork against my champagne glass. The room quieted. 20 faces turned to me, their expressions curious. "Thank you all for coming tonight." I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I know this has all been very mysterious, all the secrecy and the last-minute venue changes. I want to explain why we're here, and not at the original Christmas celebration." I told them everything, the £15,000, the conversation I'd overheard about being served leftovers, my discovery that my Christmas money had been used to pay for Danielle's wedding deposit, the seating chart that relegated me to the extra table at a dinner I had paid for. I spoke calmly, without tears or dramatic flourishes, just laying out the facts as they had happened. The room was silent when I finished. Then Aunt Linda stood up, her face flushed with anger. "They took your money for Danielle's wedding and were going to make you eat scraps. Eleanor, that's unconscionable." Uncle Robert shook his head slowly. "I knew they favored Danielle, but this is beyond favoritism. This is cruelty." Cousin Jennifer raised her glass. To Eleanor for finally standing up for herself. The clinking of a toast echoed around the room. 20 glasses raised 20 voices saying my name with something that sounded like respect, maybe even admiration. I felt something open in my chest, something that had been locked away for 38 years. This is what it felt like to be seen to matter, to be more than a convenient cash machine or a reliable safety net. My phone was still vibrating. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. 47 missed calls. 12 from my mother, 19 from my father, and 16 from Danielle. The texts were coming in a flood, each notification piling on top of the last. I put the phone on silent and slipped it back into my bag. "Excuse me just a moment," I said to the table. I stepped into the hallway where the lighting was better and opened Instagram. I took a photo of the room through the doorway, the golden light, the happy faces, the elegance of the table setting. I posted it with a simple caption, "Grateful for the family that sees me." I tagged the location, the Gramercy Hotel. I tagged the date, Christmas Day. Then I turned my phone off completely and went back to dinner. The food was extraordinary. Sebastian's had outdone themselves with a melt-in-your-mouth prime rib, a rich, perfectly seasoned lobster bisque, and roasted vegetables that tasted like they'd been kissed by a winter garden. We ate slowly, savouring each course. The conversation flowed easily around the table. People asked me about my job, my life in London, my plans for the new year. They listened when I answered. They looked at me when I spoke. This is what family dinners were supposed to feel like, not relegated to corners and afterthoughts, but front and centre, present and valued. At 8:30 p.m., as dessert was being served, Aunt Linda leaned towards me. "Your phone is lighting up inside your handbag. I can see it from here. I'll check it later." I smiled, taking a bite of the molten chocolate cake. "Not tonight. Tonight is for being here with all of you, for celebrating Christmas the way it's meant to be celebrated." She squeezed my hand. "Good for you, dear. Good for you." I knew what was happening 15 miles away. My parents standing in that empty, beautifully decorated room, realizing no one was coming. Realizing I knew, realizing everyone knew, calling and no one picking up, the panic rising with every unanswered ring, checking social media and seeing my post, seeing the location tag. Understanding in one horrible moment that their entire plan had fallen apart. Danielle would be furious, her perfect Christmas ruined, her social media narrative shattered. My mother would be mortified, her careful preparations exposed as the cruel joke they were. My father would be bewildered, unable to comprehend how his reliable daughter had finally become unreliable. But none of it touched me as I sat in that room, surrounded by genuine warmth and sincere appreciation, eating the food I had paid for at a table where I was not an afterthought. Christmas was all set. I just changed the play we were going to perform. I didn't witness what happened at the Riverside Inn, but Melissa's contact filled me in later with details that were almost too satisfying to be real. My parents arrived at 5:55 p.m. punctual. My mother clutching her phone, checking her reflection in every shiny surface. Danielle and Marcus were right behind them. Danielle already posing for the Instagram shots she planned to take all night. The dining room was perfect, exactly as expensive and elegant as they had hoped. According to the staff member who witnessed it, my mother actually teared up. She kept saying, "Eleanor really outdid herself. This is even better than I imagined." The person Melissa contacted told me later, "Your father was nodding along, looking proud. The sister was already taking selfies." They settled themselves at what they considered the head table, the one near the windows with the best light. They waited for the guests to arrive, checking their phones and making small talk. My mother kept looking at the door. her smile growing more and more strained with each passing minute. At 6:20 p.m., she approached the staff. "Have any of our guests checked in yet? The Hartwell party." The event coordinator pulled up her tablet and scrolled through the reservation list. "I'm sorry, what was the name?" "Under Hartwell." "Richard and Susan Hartwell. We're hosting a Christmas dinner for 32. More scrolling. A confused expression. "Ma'am, I don't have a reservation under that name. This room was booked for a private event setup, only not an actual event." That's when things started to fall apart. My father stepped in his voice, taking on that commanding tone he used when he expected to be obeyed. There must be some mistake. Our daughter arranged everything. Eleanor Hartwell. She paid for the entire dinner. The coordinator checked again, then consulted with the front desk, then finally pulled up the work order. According to our records, this room was hired for decoration only. A certain Ms. Shaw paid for the setup. There's no food order, no staff assigned, and no event scheduled. My mother's face apparently went white, but Eleanor sent £15,000. She said it was for Christmas dinner. She confirmed she'd be here. I can only tell you what's in our system, ma'am. Perhaps there was a miscommunication. That's when my father demanded to see a manager. There were raised voices. My mother started to cry. Not the delicate tears she'd cried when I transferred her the money, but ugly, panicked sobs. Danielle stood frozen, her phone still in her hand. Her carefully composed Instagram-perfect expression had crumbled into something raw and confused. The manager had been patient but firm. They had no reservation for the Hartwell party. No catering had been ordered. The room's setup was purely decorative, having been hired through a third party for reasons the hotel was not at liberty to disclose. If they wanted to order food, they were welcome to dine in the main restaurant, but this private room was not available for their use beyond the decorative hire period, which ended at 7:30 p.m. At 6:45 p.m., other guests started to arrive. Not the family members my parents were expecting, but neighbors from Cedar Falls who had heard about the elegant Christmas dinner and wanted to see the Hartwells' lavish celebration. The Mitchells from across the street, the Johnsons from their church. They walked into the dining room to find my parents arguing with staff. Danielle crying in a corner, and Marcus looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "What's going on?" Mrs. Mitchell asked, her eyes wide with a curiosity that would fuel weeks of gossip. "Where is everyone? Where's the food?" My mother tried to explain her words, tumbling over each other. Something about a mix-up about Eleanor having handled the arrangements, about how there must be some mistake. But even as she spoke, she was dialing relatives trying to get through to Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, the cousins. Every call went to voicemail. Every text went unanswered, because they were all with me, 35 miles away, eating prime rib, laughing and toasting new beginnings. Danielle's breakdown was spectacular, according to the staff who witnessed it. She screamed at my mother that it was her fault for trusting me. She screamed at my father for not checking the arrangements. She grabbed her phone and tried to call me, her voice high and ragged. "Pick up, Eleanor. Pick up right now. You've ruined Christmas. You've ruined everything." But my phone was off silent in my handbag as I savored molten chocolate cake and genuine conversation. The Mitchells and the Johnsons made a hasty exit, muttering about other engagements, but everyone in that room knew they were leaving to spread the word. By 7 p.m., half of Cedar Falls would know that the Hartwells' elegant Christmas dinner had been a spectacular failure, that their daughter Eleanor, the reliable, invisible one, had somehow pulled the rug out from under them in the most public way possible. My parents were escorted out of the Riverside Inn at 7:15, asked politely but firmly to leave as other guests needed the space. They stood in the car park, my mother still crying. My father's face red with rage and confusion. Danielle frantically scrolling through her phone trying to make sense of what had happened. It was in that moment that Danielle looked at Instagram. It was in that moment that she saw my post. The elegant dining room, the happy faces, the location tag for the Gramercy Hotel. The caption that was both simple and devastating. Grateful for the family that sees me. She showed the phone first to my mother, then to my father. The three of them stood there staring at that one image, the full weight of it washing over them in waves. The empty dining room they'd been standing in wasn't a mistake. It was intentional, deliberate, planned. I hadn't forgotten about Christmas dinner. I had relocated it without them. My mother tried to call me again. My father sent text after text. Danielle replied to my Instagram post, quickly deleted it, then posted another and deleted that too. Nothing they did could change what had already happened. The dinner was happening, the family was celebrating, just not with them. Marcus apparently suggested they go to a restaurant to try and salvage the evening. But what restaurant would be open on Christmas night? And even if they found one, how could they face each other across a table, knowing that the 32 people they had hoped to impress were instead celebrating with the daughter they had planned to humiliate? The neighbors had seen. The town would know by morning. Danielle's social media followers would notice the discrepancy between her morning post about the amazing family celebration and the lack of any photos from the event itself. Questions would be asked, explanations would be required. Then their phones vibrated simultaneously. One photo, one caption, total devastation. The picture I posted wasn't particularly artistic, just a candid shot of the room full of warm light and happy faces. People caught mid-conversation and laughter wine glasses reflecting the chandeliers. But it told a story that needed no embellishment. This is what family looked like when you removed the people who made you invisible. Within an hour, Aunt Linda had shared the post on her own page with the comment, "The best Christmas dinner in years. Eleanor, thank you for bringing us together in a place where everyone was valued equally." Her post was careful, even diplomatic, but the implication was clear to anyone who knew our family dynamic. Cousin Jennifer went further. She shared my photo with a caption so long it took my breath away when I read it. Tonight I learned my cousin Eleanor funded what was supposed to be a family Christmas dinner, only to discover that the people receiving it planned to serve her leftovers at a side table while everyone else ate first. So she invited those of us who actually value her to a beautiful celebration instead. Sometimes standing up for yourself means leaving some people behind. Proud of you, Eleanor. The shares snowballed. Within 2 hours, my simple post had been shared 47 times by people at the dinner and their friends. Each share added context, filled in details, painted a picture of betrayal and justified revenge that apparently resonated with anyone who had ever felt undervalued by their own family. Comments started appearing from people I had never met. "Good for you. They got what they deserved. I hope you enjoyed every bite." But the most telling comments came from people in Cedar Falls' neighbors and acquaintances who had witnessed my family's humiliation firsthand. Mrs. Mitchell, who had arrived at the riverside expecting a celebration, commented on Jennifer's post. "I was there when they realized no one was coming. It was chaos. The mother was crying. The sister was screaming. I didn't understand what happened until I saw this post. Now it all makes sense." A man named Todd Hanson, who apparently went to school with my father, wrote, "I've always wondered about that family dynamic. Eleanor was always working, always helping out, but they acted like she didn't exist at gatherings. The younger daughter got all the attention. I guess Eleanor finally had enough. My mother's friend Carol tried to defend them. There must be some misunderstanding. Susan would never hurt Eleanor on purpose, but her comment was immediately swamped by replies from people who had been at my dinner. People who had heard the full story. people who were not interested in giving my parents the benefit of the doubt. At 8:45 p.m., my mother posted her own statement. I was back at the table finishing dessert when Aunt Linda showed me her phone. You need to see this. My mother's post was a masterclass in deflection. Tonight there was unfortunately a misunderstanding about our family Christmas celebration. We were so sad that the plans fell through and we couldn't all be together. Family is everything to us, and we hope to resolve this miscommunication soon. Merry Christmas to all. The comments section became a battleground within minutes. The first reply was from Uncle Robert. There was no misunderstanding, Susan. Eleanor paid for a dinner you were planning to use her as a housemaid for. She found out and made other arrangements. That's not a misunderstanding. That's consequences. My cousin Michael added I was at Eleanor's dinner tonight. She explained everything. You took her Christmas money for Danielle's wedding and planned to serve her leftovers at a corner table. Don't try to gaslight the entire family by saying it was a misunderstanding. My mother tried to reply, tried to clarify, claiming there was confusion about the seating arrangements and menu planning. But every comment she made was immediately contradicted by someone who had been at my dinner, someone who knew the truth, someone who was not willing to let her rewrite history in real time. Danielle's response was more dramatic. She posted a long, rambling screed on Instagram about how I had sabotaged Christmas because I was jealous of her engagement and couldn't stand to see her happy. She claimed I had stolen the money meant for a family celebration and used it to buy the loyalty of relatives who should have known better. The post stayed up for 17 minutes before the comments became too brutal to ignore. People from her school she barely remembered pointed out she'd never held a real job. Old friends observed that her entire lifestyle seemed to be funded by other people. Someone found and shared her post from that morning about the amazing celebration my family is putting on, and asked why there were no pictures of the celebration if it was so amazing. By 9:30 p.m., Danielle's entire Instagram account went dark, either deleted or made private. I couldn't tell which. My mother stopped replying to comments on her post. My father, who rarely used social media anyway, posted nothing at all. But the damage was done. The story was outshared and reshared, commented on, and discussed. Cedar Falls was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. But this was more than just local gossip. This was a narrative about favoritism and neglect, about a daughter pushed to the brink who finally pushed back. It resonated because it was both specific and universal. Everyone knew a family like mine. Some people were in a family like mine. My phone, which I'd turned back on at 9 p.m., showed 99 missed calls by 10 p.m. The voicemails were piling up, each one more desperate than the last. My mother pleading for me to call her back, my father demanding I answer the phone. Danielle alternately crying and screaming her messages, an incoherent mess of rage and hurt. At 10:15 p.m., my phone rang for the 100th time. I was in the lobby of the Gramercy Hotel, saying goodbye to guests accepting hugs and well wishes. It showed my mother's name. I looked at it for a long moment, feeling the weight of 38 years in that one decision. I answered, put the phone to my ear, and waited. Eleanor. My mother's voice was hoarse, ragged from crying. Please, please talk to me. Please explain what happened. We're devastated. The whole town is talking. Danielle is hysterical. Your father won't speak. Please, Eleanor, please. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and then said the only 3 words that mattered. Merry Christmas, Mum. The silence that followed those 3 words stretched on for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then my mother's voice came back higher and sharper than before. Merry Christmas, Eleanor. How dare you? How dare you say that to me after what you've done? Do you have any idea what you put us through tonight? The humiliation, the embarrassment. Your sister is in her room crying her eyes out. Your father won't even look at me. The whole town is talking about us like we're monsters. I stepped away from the lobby into a quiet corner near the cloakroom. Outside the window, I could see the snow still falling, peaceful and steady. Inside me, something felt equally steady, calm, clear. You were planning to sit me at the side table with the leftovers. Another silence. This one different, heavier. What? It's a simple question, Mum. Did you plan to seat me at a separate table away from the family and serve me last with whatever food was left after everyone else had eaten, Eleanor? That's not. There were space constraints, she said quickly. We had to figure out the best arrangement for everyone, and some people had to sit at different tables. It wasn't personal. I overheard you. My voice was still calm, almost gentle. On the 22nd of December, I stopped by with homemade biscuits. You were in the kitchen with Dad Danielle and Aunt Karen. You were discussing the seating arrangements. You said, and I quote, "The family sits at the main table. Eleanor will sit at the side table with the cousins and the Andersons. She'll be served after everyone at the main table has finished. Whatever's left, she won't mind. She never does." The silence was absolute now. I could hear my mother's breathing, quick and shallow. When she spoke again, her voice had changed lower, defensive. "You weren't supposed to hear that." No, I agreed. I wasn't, but I did. And then Danielle laughed and said that was awful. But yes, I never complain. And Dad said I was just happy to be included, that I always have been. Do you remember saying those things, Mum? Because I remember hearing them. It was taken out of context. The words came faster now in a rush of desperation. We were just trying to work out the logistics. The main table was for the core family, and you are core family. But there wasn't enough room for everyone. And we thought you wouldn't mind since you're so easygoing. And we didn't mean it to be hurtful. It was just practical planning. Which family members at the side table were closer than I was, I asked. The Andersons aren't related to us. The cousins see you once a year. But your daughter, the one who paid for the entire dinner, she was less close than your neighbors. You're twisting everything. My mother's voice rose again towards hysteria. You're making it sound worse than it was. We love you, Eleanor. We've always loved you. You're being unfair. Then let me ask you something else. I kept my tone conversational, almost curious. The £15,000 I transferred to you on November 21st, the money I sent with the note for our family Christmas celebration. Where did that money go? The silence was so complete, I checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Mum, we were going to tell you. The words came out in a rush. We were going to explain everything. It's just that Danielle found this perfect venue and the deposit had to be paid immediately. And we knew you'd understand, because family helps family. And we were still going to have the Christmas dinner. Maybe not as expensive as we'd originally planned, but still nice. Still special. So you used my Christmas money for Danielle's wedding deposit. We were going to pay you back after the holidays. We were going to work out a payment plan. Your father talked to the bank about a loan. We weren't stealing from you, Eleanor. We were just borrowing it temporarily. Did you ask me if you could borrow it? Well, no, but you'd already offered the money for Christmas, and it was basically the same thing. Money for a family celebration. And we knew you'd say yes anyway, because you always help when we need it. So you took the £15,000 I gave you for one purpose, used it for something else entirely without telling me, and then planned to serve me leftovers at a side table at a dinner you were going to cobble together on a budget. And when I found out and made other plans, I'm the cruel and vindictive one. You humiliated us on purpose, my mother said, her voice breaking. You could have talked to us. You could have given us a chance to explain. Instead, you went behind our backs and turned the whole family against us. You made us look like horrible people in front of everyone we know. I didn't make you look like anything, Mum. I just stopped pretending. I stopped accepting scraps and calling it a cake. I stopped being invisible and being grateful for it. We never made you invisible. When was the last time you called me just to talk? Not because you needed something, not because there was an emergency, but just to see how I was. Silence. When was the last time you visited me in London in the 7 years I've lived here? More silence. When was the last time you remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you? That's not fair, she said, her voice weak, all the fight draining out of her. We've been busy. Danielle's needed support with the engagement, your father's health. There's been so much going on. There's always been so much going on, I said. There's always been a reason Danielle needed more attention, more money, more everything. And I've always accepted it because I thought that's what family meant. Sacrifice without recognition, service without gratitude, presence without visibility. You taught me my place in this family, Mum. For 38 years, you've taught me exactly what my place was. I'm just finally accepting it on my own terms. Eleanor, please. Merry Christmas, Mum. I hope you and Dad and Danielle have a wonderful evening together. You always preferred it when it was just the three of you anyway. I ended the call, turned my phone off completely, and this time, just to be sure, I removed the battery. My hands were trembling slightly, the adrenaline finally catching up to the calm I'd maintained throughout the conversation. But underneath the tremor was something solid. Something that felt like a foundation, a floor I could stand on. I thought it would be the end, but they weren't done humiliating themselves yet. I slept well on Christmas night, better than I had in weeks. No phone buzzing with demands or emotional manipulation attempts. No churning anxiety about whether I'd done the right thing. Just deep, dreamless sleep that left me feeling rested for the first time since I'd overheard that conversation in the kitchen. The banging on my flat door started at 8 a.m. on Boxing Day, loud, insistent, the kind that said the person on the other side wasn't leaving until I answered. I put on my dressing gown, walked silently to the door, looked through the peephole, and my stomach dropped. All three of them. My mother, my father, and Danielle stood in my hallway looking like they'd driven through the night. My mother's face was puffy from crying. My father's jaw was set in that rigid way that meant he was barely holding on to his temper. Danielle looked worse than both of them, her hair unkempt, her eyes red-rimmed, still wearing yesterday's clothes. I opened the door, but I didn't invite them in. How did you get past building security? We told them it was a family emergency. My father said, his voice flat and harsh. We need to talk now. I don't think we have anything to discuss. Eleanor Hartwell. My mother's voice trembled. You will let us in, and you will listen to us. You owe us that much after what you did. I stepped back, not because I owed them anything, but because I didn't want this conversation to happen where my neighbors could hear. They filed in. My mother immediately scanned my flat with the kind of critical eye she'd never bothered to use on any of her previous visits. Of course, she'd only been here twice in 7 years, both times when she needed something. You've destroyed our family's reputation. My father began before I'd even closed the door. The whole town is talking about us like we're criminals. Your mother can't even show her face at church. Danielle's friends are asking questions about her wedding money. You have publicly humiliated us, and you need to fix it. How exactly am I supposed to fix it? A public apology. Danielle said, her voice hoarse. Probably from the crying. You need to post on social media that you misunderstood what happened, that it was a family misunderstanding, that we did nothing wrong. But you did do something wrong. We made a mistake. My mother's voice was verging on hysterical. We made a poor choice about the seating arrangement, and we should have asked before using your money for Danielle's deposit. But that doesn't justify what you did. You could have talked to us in private. Instead, you turned the entire family against us. You've ruined Danielle's wedding before it's even happened because now everyone thinks we stole from you. You did steal from me. We borrowed, my father yelled. There's a difference. We were always going to pay you back. Were you going to tell me you'd borrowed it? Or were you just going to let me think I'd funded a Christmas dinner that never existed? Danielle stepped forward, her face contorted with an emotion I couldn't quite place. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me, of the attention I get, of my relationship with Mum and Dad, of Marcus, of everything. This was all just an excuse to ruin my wedding and make yourself the victim. I am a victim. I kept my voice calm. I'm the daughter who was treated like a cash machine for 20 years, who was made invisible at every family gathering, who bankrolled your wedding without even knowing it while you were planning to serve me scraps at the Christmas dinner I paid for. My mother's handbag slipped off her shoulder as she gestured wildly. You're exaggerating. We love you just as much as we love Danielle. We've always treated you both the same. The bag hit the floor with a thud. Contents scattered across my wooden floor: lipstick, keys, wallet, tissues, and papers. Several papers that slid in different directions. My father bent to gather them, but I was closer to one document in particular. I picked it up before he could stop me. It was a form from United Life Insurance, a beneficiary designation update dated 6 months prior. Primary beneficiary Danielle Marie Hartwell. Contingent beneficiary none. Policy amount £500,000. I stared at the numbers, the neat checkboxes, my sister's name and my mother's handwriting. What is this? My mother's face went pale. Eleanor. That's private financial information. This is your and Dad's life insurance policy. I looked up at my parents' £500,000, and Danielle is the sole beneficiary. We were going to update it. My father started, his voice losing its harsh edge. We were going to add you, but we just haven't got around to it. This form is dated June 15th. 6 months ago, you actively chose to make Danielle the sole beneficiary 6 months ago. I felt something cold spread through my chest. I'm not even the contingent beneficiary. If something happens to Danielle, the money goes to her estate, not to me. Mrs. Chen, from flat 4B, chose that moment to step out of her flat across the hall. She paused with her door ajar, her eyes travelling from me, from my parents to the paper in my hand. I knew Mrs. Chen. We'd had coffee together twice. She was kind, observant, and absolutely the type of person who would remember every detail of what she witnessed. I showed the document with no dramatic flourish, just positioned it so Mrs. Chen could see it if she chose to. My voice was quiet but clear. Danielle gets everything. Even after you're gone, I was never part of your future. My mother reached for the paper, but I pulled it back. Eleanor, you don't understand. Danielle doesn't have a career like you do. She needs security. We knew you'd be fine on your own. You always are, but Danielle needs support. Danielle is 32 and engaged to a financial consultant. I think she'll manage without an extra £500,000. I looked at the form again, at the date, at my sister's name alone, where mine should have been at least beside it. But this explains so much. The seating arrangement at Christmas. Taking my money without asking. You don't see me as your daughter. You see me as a resource, a backup plan, someone to call when you need money or help, but not someone who actually matters enough to be included in your estate planning. That's not true. My mother was crying again. We love you. This is just a practical matter of making sure Danielle is taken care of. And I don't need to be taken care of because I've been taking care of myself since I was 16. Taking care of you too. Paying for your emergencies, showing up when you call, sending money whenever you hinted you needed it. But love isn't supposed to be transactional, and family isn't supposed to write you out of the future while they suck you dry in the present. Mrs. Chen closed her door quietly, but I knew she had heard everything. I knew she had seen the document. I knew that by noon, everyone in the building would know, and by evening, more people would know. Not because I was trying to spread gossip, but because sometimes the truth just spreads on its own when you stop trying to hide it. It's then that I realized the dinner was just the surface. The betrayal was deep and visceral. "Let me make sure I understand the full picture," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I started working at 16 to help with the family finances. I worked 2 jobs through sixth form, while Danielle focused on being popular and pretty. I paid for my own university education while you funded Danielle's modeling portfolio. I've sent money home for 22 years' emergency funds for roof repairs, car trouble, medical bills, whatever crisis came up. I drove through a blizzard to be at the hospital when Dad had his heart attack. I've been there for every family emergency, every time you called without hesitation or complaint. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. In return, I got to sit at the extra table at Sunday roasts. I got a text message for my master's degree, while Danielle got a party for her college course. I was overlooked on birthdays and forgotten on holidays. And this year, when I offered to fund a £15,000 Christmas dinner, you took that money and used it for Danielle's wedding without telling me. Then you planned to sit me at a side table away from the family and serve me whatever food was left after everyone else had eaten. You talked about it in the kitchen, laughing about how I never complain, about how I'm just happy to be included. Eleanor, please? And now I find out that 6 months ago you updated your life insurance policy to make Danielle the sole beneficiary of £500,000. Not split between your 2 daughters, not even with me as a contingent beneficiary. Just Danielle, because apparently even in death, I'm not worth including in your plans. The hallway was completely silent except for my voice. Even Danielle had stopped crying, her face frozen in an expression somewhere between shock and shame. So tell me, Mum, tell me, Dad, what part of that pattern suggests you love me equally? What part of that suggests you see me as a daughter and not just a convenient source of income? My mother's face crumpled into a mask of grief. She slid to the floor, right there in the hallway, her back against my flat door. And when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You remind me of me." I stared at her. "What?" "You remind me of me." She looked up at me with those red-rimmed, swollen eyes. I was the strong daughter too, the reliable one, the one who worked and sacrificed while my sister got everything handed to her. My parents loved her more. Everyone loved her more, and I hated it. I hated being strong. I hated being capable. I hated being the one who had to handle everything while she got to be fragile and beautiful and special. The confession hung in the air like smoke. My father stood completely still, his eyes fixed on some point on the wall. Danielle was staring at our mother with an expression I couldn't read. I hated myself. My mother continued, her voice breaking. I hated the daughter I was. So when I had Danielle, when I saw how much she was like my sister, how beautiful and charming and delicate she was, I promised myself I would make her life easy. I would give her everything I never had. I would protect her from ever having to be strong. And me? I asked quietly. What was I supposed to be? You were so capable. From the time you were a little girl, you just handled things. You didn't need me the way Danielle did. So I let you handle things. I let you be strong because someone had to be. And it was easier to let it be you than to face my own grief over the price I'd paid for being strong. It was the most honest thing my mother had ever said to me. It was also the most devastating. She hadn't treated me this way out of malice or even conscious choice. She'd treated me this way because I represented everything she hated about herself, and Danielle represented everything she had ever wanted to be. It was a cycle of pain passed down like an heirloom, and I had been paying the interest for 38 years. That doesn't make it right, I said. I know. My mother's voice was faint. I know it doesn't. My father still hadn't spoken. He just stood there like a statue, his hands clenched at his sides, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words he couldn't get out. His silence was somehow worse than anything he could have said. It confirmed what I'd always suspected. He went along with all of it, enabled all of it, because it was easier than confronting his wife or examining his own role in the family dynamic. This isn't fair to me. Danielle's voice suddenly cut through the silence, high desperate. I didn't ask to be the favorite. I didn't ask for any of this. You're all acting like I'm the villain when I'm just the daughter who was loved. This isn't my fault. Mrs. Chen's door cracked open. She stood in the doorway, her phone in her hand, angled in a way that made it clear she was recording. I am documenting this, she said calmly, her accent thicker than usual. Someone needs to protect this woman. You come to her house, you yell, you make accusations. She shows you proof of how you have treated her. This is harassment. I have it all on record now. My mother's face went white. My father finally found his voice. You can't record a private conversation without consent. In this country, you only need one-party consent. Mrs. Chen cut in. I am a party to this conversation because it's happening in our shared hallway where I live. You want to threaten to sue your own daughter. Know that someone has proof of what really happened here. Danielle looked like she was going to be sick. You're recording this. You're actually recording our family business. Your family business is abusive, Mrs. Chen said flatly. I see that clearly now is a good tenant, a good neighbor, a good person. You come here and tell her she owes you an apology for standing up for herself. I will make sure the truth is recorded. My father's hand went to his pocket, probably for his own phone, but he stopped. What could he do? Demand she stop, call the police. They had shown up at my home uninvited. They had confronted me in a shared hallway. And everything they had said, everything I had revealed, everything my mother had confessed, it was all true, all documented now, all undeniable. The life insurance form was still in my hand. I looked down at it, at my sister's name alone, at the date that proved it wasn't an oversight, but a deliberate choice made 6 months ago. That sentence I hated myself that would haunt me for weeks, but it didn't make it right. Mrs. Chen didn't take long to share what she had witnessed. On the 27th of December, her detailed account appeared on the Cedar Falls Community Forum, a Facebook group with over 3,000 members that served as the town's unofficial news network. She wrote with meticulous accuracy about the morning confrontation, the raised voices, the insurance document, my mother's confession about hating her own strength, and projecting that pain onto me. She even posted a still from the video showing my mother slumped in the hallway. The faces were blurred to preserve some semblance of privacy. The post got 400 comments in 6 hours. People I'd gone to school with suddenly remembered instances of my parents favoring Danielle. My old neighbors recalled seeing me work multiple jobs, while Danielle got new clothes and cars. Church members started discussing patterns they had noticed over the years, but never questioned out loud. The narrative was solidifying, and this time my parents couldn't control it. Pastor Williams from the First Methodist Church, where my parents had been members for 30 years, called my mother on December 28th. The conversation was gentle but firm. Perhaps the family needed some time to heal in private before returning to Sunday services. Perhaps it would be best if they stepped back from their leadership positions. My mother had been the treasurer of the Women's Auxiliary Group for 12 years. That role was quietly reassigned. The fallout spread faster than I could have predicted. Danielle called me on December 29th, her voice a ragged mess of tears and anger. Marcus's parents want to meet with us. They've heard about the Christmas money. They're asking questions about how we funded the venue deposit. She paused. I could hear her ragged breathing. His mother asked me directly if we stole from you. She used that word. Stole. I said nothing. The Ashworth estate called too. There was an inquiry about a payment discrepancy. Someone had contacted them asking if the money came from Eleanor Hartwell and whether I had authorization to use funds intended for a different purpose. Her voice rose. Did you call them? Did you report us? I didn't call anyone, I said truthfully. But the truth has a way of getting out on its own. This is destroying my life, she screamed. Marcus is rethinking everything. His family thinks I'm some kind of grifter. The wedding venue is threatening to return the deposit and cancel our date. Everything is falling apart. Because you couldn't just let it go. I did let it go, I said quietly. For 22 years I let it go. Every little slight. Every snub. Every time I was treated as less than, I let it all go until you tried to make me eat scraps at a dinner I paid for. That's when I stopped letting it go. She hung up without another word. The social consequences unfolded with the slow, inevitable weight of a rock slide. The Endersons, who had hosted a New Year's Eve party for 15 years that my parents always attended, called on the 30th of December to uninvite them. Apologetically but firmly. Given the circumstances, given what's come to light, it just seemed best if you stayed home this year. My father responded with cold dignity, thanking them for their honesty. His Thursday night poker group just stopped calling, no confrontation, no explanation, just silence where there had been weekly invitations for 8 years. The group included Tom Mitchell, whose wife had seen the empty Riverside Inn dining room. My mother's book club held an emergency meeting on December 31st to discuss whether Susan Hartwell should remain a member. 4 women argued for expulsion, 3 argued for compassion, and 2 abstained. They reached a compromise. She could stay, but she was removed from the planning committee and barred from hosting. My mother attended, sat in silence, then left before they finished deliberating. The local supermarket became hostile territory. Quiet cashiers, old friends men suddenly busy in other aisles. Mrs. Patterson, a former book club member, once remarked loudly in the queue behind my mother about people who play favourites with their children. I heard about all of this through relatives and former neighbours who suddenly felt compelled to keep me in the loop. Aunt Linda, calling every other day. Cousin Jennifer texting screenshots. Even strangers, Cheyenne, reaching out to offer support. The story had taken on a life of its own, spreading through Cedar Falls like a particularly virulent strain of the truth. What surprised me most was that I didn't feel victorious. I had imagined that exposing my family's treatment of me would bring satisfaction, a sense of justice done. Instead, I just felt a hollow ache. I had wasted 38 years trying to win the love of people who had already decided I wasn't worthy of it. Now everyone knew the truth, and it didn't change that fundamental fact. I went to work, came home, and existed in a space that felt neither happy nor sad, just empty. New Year's came without celebration. I watched the ball drop on television and went to bed at 12:15 a.m., feeling nothing in particular. On January 3rd, a letter arrived in my postbox. Handwritten address, Cedar Falls, postmark, no return address. I almost threw it away, assuming it was either hate mail or a ham-fisted attempt at compassion. I'd received both, but something made me open it. The envelope was cream-coloured, expensive stationery my mother reserved for special occasions. Her handwriting was neat and precise. I opened it and pulled out 3 pages, covered front and back in her distinctive script. My dearest Eleanor, I almost stopped reading right there. My mother had never called me dearest, or anything like it in my entire life, but I continued. The first page was pure remorse, sleepless nights, conversations with my father, finally seeing herself clearly understanding how she had repeated her own childhood trauma by making me invisible because she couldn't bear her own pain. I see now I made you invisible because I couldn't bear to look at my own pain, she wrote. You deserved so much more than the mother I was. The second page detailed their commitment to change. Family therapy. A support group for mothers, my father reading a book on emotional neglect. We're doing the work, Eleanor. The real hard work to become the parents you always deserved. She listed specific memories she now regretted. My 16th birthday overlooked for Danielle's cheerleading competition. Leaving my university graduation early for Danielle's modelling audition. Christmas mornings where my practical gifts were forgotten while Danielle's were photographed. I see it all now, she wrote. Every time I prioritized her comfort over your dignity. Every time I treated you as a resource instead of a daughter. I am so, so sorry. I felt something stir in my chest, a dangerous thing that felt like hope. Maybe they were really changing. Maybe the public humiliation had been the wake-up call they needed. Maybe after 38 years, I was finally going to get the parents I'd always wanted. Then I turned to the third page. The tone shifted. The final paragraphs became a little less emotional and a little more practical. Your father and I are committed to making amends, she wrote. We want to start fresh with you to build the relationship we should have had all along. But we also need to be honest about our current situation. My stomach began to churn before I even read the next sentence. The last few weeks have been financially difficult. The venue deposit for Danielle's wedding is being held, while the Ashworth Estate Management investigates the source of the funds. We've had to put down an additional deposit on an alternative venue in case they decide to cancel. The holidays were more expensive than we anticipated, and with your father's reduced hours at work, due to the stress, we're in a tight spot. I was reading faster now, my earlier hope curdling into something bitter. We're not asking for a gift. We would never abuse your generosity again after everything that's happened, but we were wondering if you would be willing to extend us a short-term loan to help us through this difficult period. £8,000 would cover our immediate needs. We can draw up a formal repayment plan with interest if you'd prefer. We could have the money back to you within 6 months. The letter ended with more apologies, more expressions of love and regret, more promises of therapy and change. But I couldn't see anything clearly anymore because my vision was a little blurry from rage, or maybe tears, or maybe just the exhausted realization that they would never ever learn. I read the letter again, and then a third time. Each reading made it worse. The elaborate setup, 3 pages of carefully constructed remorse, all building to one real goal to get more money out of me. They had dressed it up in therapy speak and genuine-sounding apologies, but the final paragraph revealed them for what they'd always been. I was still a resource, still a cash machine, still the reliable daughter they could count on to finance their problems. The laugh that escaped me was harsh and loud, echoing off the walls of my silent flat. I laughed until my stomach hurt, until tears streamed down my face, until the sheer absurdity of it all fully set in. They had just been publicly exposed for stealing £15,000 from me and treating me like a second-class family member. And their response was to ask for another £8,000. I called Rachel, my old university flatmate, and the closest thing I had to a best friend. She answered on the second ring. Please tell me you're calling with good news for once. Oh, I'm calling with news, I said, still laughing a little. My mother sent me a letter. It's an apology, It's 3 pages of apologies that end with a request for an £8,000 loan. I heard Rachel's sharp intake of breath. Do you want me to read it to you? Absolutely. Yes. I read the entire letter aloud, putting special emphasis on the flowery language of the first 2 pages and the casual pivot to the loan request on the third. When I finished, Rachel was silent for a long moment. Eleanor, she said finally, her voice cautious. You know what this is, don't you? Enlighten me. They're not apologizing, they're marketing. This is a sales pitch disguised as soul-searching. They're trying to sell you on the idea that they've changed so you'll buy back into the family dynamic. Literally buy back in for £8,000. The clarity of her words hit me like a bucket of cold water. Marketing. That's exactly what it was. They had evaluated their approach, realized the old tactics weren't working, and rebranded. New packaging, same product. A remorseful family who had learned their lesson and just needed one more favor to get back on their feet. I looked at the letter again, at my mother's careful handwriting, at the expensive stationery that probably cost £30 a box. I'm going to frame this, I said. I'm going to frame this letter and hang it on my wall, so that whenever I start to doubt myself, whenever I wonder if maybe I was too harsh, or if I should give them another chance, I can look at it and remember exactly who they are. That's exactly what I did. The next day, I bought a simple black frame from an art supply shop and carefully mounted the letter behind the glass. I hung it in my home office right above my desk, where I would see it every day. The reminder I needed. Some people never change. They just get better at asking for what they want. They still saw me as a resource, not a person. But my sister had a different plan. Danielle showed up in the lobby of my office building on January 24th, a Thursday afternoon, when the winter light was already fading to dusk. I was heading out for my lunch break when I saw her sitting in one of the visitors' chairs near the lifts, her face red and blotchy from crying. She stood when she saw me, and for a moment we just stared at each other across the polished marble floor. Eleanor, her voice broke on my name. Please, I need to talk to you, just 5 minutes. My first instinct was to walk past her, to refuse the interaction, to maintain the distance I had worked so hard to establish. But something in her face stopped me. She looked genuinely broken in a way I'd never seen before. Not the performative tears she'd cried on Christmas night, but something deeper, exhausted, defeated. How did you know where I work? I asked. I've always known where you work. I've just never come before. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. I know you have no reason to trust me. I know I've been awful, but I've been doing a lot of thinking since Christmas, and I'm finally seeing things clearly. Please, just one coffee. Half an hour. If you want to walk away after that, I'll never bother you again. I should have said no. Every instinct I had developed over the last month screamed at me to refuse to protect myself, to recognize this for the manipulation it probably was. But there was a small, stubborn part of me that wanted to believe my sister could change, that wanted to believe family could be salvaged, that wanted against all evidence to be wrong about how broken we were. There's a cafe 2 blocks from here. I said half an hour. The relief on her face looked genuine. We walked in silence through the cold afternoon, the January wind cutting through our coats. The cafe was warm and crowded with the late lunch rush, but we found a table in the back corner that was relatively private, despite the noise. Danielle ordered an elaborate latte. I got a black coffee. We sat opposite each other, and for a long moment, neither of us said a word. I'm in therapy, she said finally, since the new year. Marcus insisted on it after everything that happened, and she's been helping me see things I never noticed before. She wrapped her hands around her mug. Mum and Dad manipulated both of us in different ways, but they manipulated us. They made me dependent and fragile, and they made you invisible and disposable. We were both victims of their dysfunction. It was exactly what I had been thinking for weeks, but hearing her say it gave me a jolt I hadn't expected. Go on. I was the golden child my whole life. But what does that really mean? It means I never learned to be independent. I never developed any real skills or self-confidence. I'm 32 years old, and I can't hold down a job because I've never had to. Mum and Dad turned me into this pretty helpless little creature who needs constant propping up. And that's a form of abuse, too. Her voice trembled. You were ignored, but I was smothered. Neither of us ever had a real shot. I took a sip of my coffee, thinking. She wasn't wrong. The favoritism that had elevated her had also crippled her in ways I'd never fully acknowledged. What changed? Why? Are you seeing this now? Marcus's mother sat me down and told me that if I wanted to marry her son, I needed to become an independent woman. She said she wasn't going to let her son support someone who had been trained to be helpless. Danielle's eyes filled with tears. It hurt, but she was right, and it made me realize how badly our parents had damaged us both. And Christmas dinner, I asked quietly. The seating arrangement. The money they took from me for your wedding. She closed her eyes. I knew about the money. Mum told me the day after you sent it. She said you'd offered to help with my wedding, and that she was accepting on my behalf. I should have questioned it. I should have asked you directly, but I was just so excited to be able to afford the Ashworth estate what it meant. It was a mistake, a huge mistake. This was the sister I had always wanted. Honest, self-aware, accountable. I felt the defensive walls I'd built start to crumble. What about the seating arrangement? I didn't know about that until you posted it online. I swear, Eleanor, Mum handled all the planning. She just told me to show up and look pretty. She reached a hand across the table as if to take mine, but then thought better of it. But I should have asked questions. I should have made sure you were being treated fairly. I was so focused on myself that I didn't think about you. And that's on me. Do you think I went too far? I asked. Cancelling the dinner, making it all public. Danielle was silent for a moment. I think you did what you had to do to finally be seen. Was it necessary to publicly humiliate them? Maybe not. Maybe you could have confronted them privately first, given them a chance to fix it before you blew everything up. But I also understand why you didn't. They had 38 years to fix it, and they never did. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something loosen in my chest. I've been so angry for so long, and part of me wonders if the public exposure was about justice, or just about hurting them the way they hurt me. Maybe it was a little of both, Danielle said softly. Maybe that's okay. Maybe you have a right to want them to hurt after what they did to you. We talked for another 20 minutes about therapy, about family patterns, about the possibility of building something new between us, separate from our parents' dysfunction. Account. When we said goodbye on the pavement outside my building, she hugged me and I let her. It felt like a start, like maybe something could be salvaged. After all 3 days, later on a Sunday morning, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Texts from former classmates, from distant relatives, from people I barely knew, all with variations of the same question. Did you really say that I opened Instagram and was confronted with Danielle's latest post? A series of audio snippets, my voice clear and unmistakable, lifted from our conversation in the cafe. Maybe you could have confronted them privately first. Maybe the public exposure was about hurting them. I've been so angry. Each clip was carefully edited to remove all context, all nuance, and arranged to make me sound calculating and cruel. The caption read, "My cruel sister admits she wanted to hurt us. Listen to what she has to say. She planned all of this. She wanted to destroy our family. Listen to what she has to say. The comments were already pouring in. People who had supported me after Christmas were now questioning my motives. Strangers were calling me vindictive, manipulative, a mastermind who orchestrated everything for maximum damage. The narrative I had built about standing up to abuse was crumbling under the weight of my own edited words, now weaponized against me. I called Danielle immediately. She didn't answer. I sent a text. You recorded me without my consent. You've edited my words. This is slander. No reply. This country was a one-party consent state. She could legally record our conversation, but the editing, the manipulation of context, the deliberate misrepresentation that felt like something else entirely. The war wasn't over. It was evolving and I needed proof. That Sunday afternoon, I deleted Instagram from my phone, then Facebook, then Twitter, every platform where strangers dissecting my character based on 30-second audio clips became inaccessible. My inbox was flooded with messages demanding explanations, hurling accusations, and offering unsolicited advice. I set up an auto-reply, directing people to my voicemail, and stopped checking both. Rachel called that night. Are you okay? The internet is going nuts. I'm letting it go, I said. I'm done performing for an audience. The decision to disengage felt like stepping off a treadmill I'd been running on my whole life. No more defending myself, no more explaining my motives, no more trying to control a narrative that had never really been mine to own. My family wanted a public war. They could have it without me. I went to work. I came home, had dinner with Rachel on Wednesdays, and did yoga on Saturdays. I read books that had been sitting on my shelf for months. I existed in a space that felt deliberately small and intentionally quiet. And for the first time in years, I could hear my own thoughts. But quiet, shuts, didn't mean inactive. While I had stepped away from the performative aspects of the conflict, I was working behind the scenes, in ways my family would never have imagined, because they'd never believed I was capable of strategic thought. I was just reliable, Eleanor, after all, steady, predictable, never making a fuss. I created a folder on my laptop simply labeled Documentation. Inside, I started to organize everything chronologically. Screenshots of texts where my mother asked for money, some dating back 3 years before I'd switched phones and lost the older records. Bank statements showing wire transfers with notes like, for Dad's surgery, emergency car repair, or household expenses. Email exchanges where I offered to help with family events and was told my help wasn't needed. The insurance beneficiary forms scanned and saved in multiple locations. I had more than I realized. 22 years of being the family ATM had created an extensive paper trail. Every emergency request, every casual assumption that I would cover the cost every time they accepted my help without telling me it was all recorded. But I had something else too, something I'd almost forgotten. During the coffee shop meeting with Danielle, I had been so uneasy about her sudden change of heart that I had set my phone to record before we sat down. In this country, one-party consent meant I hadn't needed her permission. I had the full, unedited conversation. Her leading questions, my carefully contextualized answers, everything she had chopped up and weaponized I had in its entirety. On a Friday night in early February, I pulled out the box I'd been avoiding for weeks. Old family papers I'd taken with me when I moved out of my parents' house at 22, things that felt too personal to leave behind, but too painful to look at childhood photos, where I was always at the edge of the frame birthday cards, with generic messages, primary school report cards. I opened the report cards first, expecting to see the usual mix of good grades, teachers' praise. What I found instead made my hands tremble. Year 3. Eleanor is a bright student, but frequently falls asleep during afternoon lessons. Is everything all right at home, Year 5? Eleanor seems exhausted. She mentioned she's working at the family's car boot sale every weekend. Please make sure she's getting enough rest. Year 7. Eleanor shows remarkable responsibility for her age. I sometimes worry she's carrying burdens that should belong to adults. The teachers had seen it. Even then, they noticed something was wrong, but no one had intervened. Or if they had, my parents had deflected so effectively that nothing changed. At the bottom of the box, underneath old essays and certificates, I found a spiral notebook. My handwriting on the cover, Private Diary, Year 5. I didn't remember keeping a diary, but there it was, filled with entries in my childish script. Most of it was mundane observations about school and friends, but scattered throughout were letters I had apparently written to my parents and never sent. One dated 3 weeks after my 12th birthday took my breath away. Dear Mum and Dad, why don't you love me like you love Danielle? I try so hard to be good and helpful. I get better grades. I don't complain when you can't come to my things, but you still look at her the way I wish you would look at me. What am I doing wrong? What do I have to do to make you see me? Love, Eleanor. I'd never sent it. At 12, I'd already known that asking for love was pointless. The pattern hadn't started at 16 when I got my first job. It hadn't started when Danielle was born and took all the attention. It was there from the beginning, woven into the fabric of our family. I was just too young to name it. I wasn't building a case. I was uncovering a lifetime of evidence that already existed. I spent the weekend reading through the notebook, each entry a small window into a child, trying desperately to understand why she wasn't enough. There were more unsent letters, scattered throughout 3 years of diary entries. Dear Mum, I got all A's again. Will you come to the awards ceremony this time, dear Dad? I know Danielle's dance recital is on the same day as my science fair, but maybe you could split up and one of you could come see my project. Dear Mum and Dad, am I adopted? Sometimes I feel like I must be because you don't act like I'm really your daughter. That last one hit me the hardest. I had been 11 when I wrote it, sitting at my desk in my small bedroom while Danielle's laughter echoed from the living room where she was showing our parents a new cheerleading routine. I remembered that moment now, that specific ache of wondering if there was some biological explanation for why I felt so fundamentally separate from my own family. The abuse hadn't started when I got my first job at 16. It hadn't started when they started asking for money. It was there from the beginning, woven into every interaction, every family photo, where I stood slightly apart, every birthday, where my cake was shop-bought, while Danielle's was custom-ordered. Christmas was just the moment I was finally strong enough and self-aware enough to fight back. But the pattern had been set decades earlier. On Monday morning, I called the therapist Rachel had been recommending for months. Dr. Sarah Chen had a practice specializing in family trauma and had an opening that very week due to a cancellation. When I walked into her office on Thursday evening, she greeted me with a warmth that felt professional but genuine. I told her everything. The Christmas dinner, the stolen money, the insurance policy, the edited recording, but also the childhood letters, the teacher's comments, the decades of feeling invisible. She listened with the kind of focused attention I'd spent my life craving from my parents, taking occasional notes, but mostly just being present. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "What you're describing is a classic case of the golden child and scapegoat dynamic. It's a form of family abuse, where parents assign one child as the holder of all the family's value and another as the family's problem. Neither role is healthy, but the scapegoated child suffers in specific ways that often go unnoticed because they're high-functioning, successful, capable. That's me. I said high-functioning, successful, capable, exhausted and invisible, and convinced for most of your life that if you just tried harder, achieved more, gave more, you would finally earn the love you deserved. She leaned forward slightly. Eleanor, I want you to hear this. None of it was your fault. Nothing you could have done would have changed their behavior because the problem was never you. The problem was always them. I cried then. Not the angry tears I'd cried on Christmas night, but something deeper. Something that felt like grief for the little girl who wrote those letters, for the teenager who worked herself to exhaustion, and for the adult who transferred £15,000 in the hope that it would finally be enough. It wasn't your fault, repeated Dr. Chen. It never was. The validation felt like being seen by the right people for the first time, not by a social media audience judging based on edited videos, but by someone trained to recognize patterns of family dysfunction. Someone who could name what had happened to me and confirm that, yes, it was real, it was harmful, and I had every right to be angry. I booked weekly appointments, started reading the texts she recommended on family scapegoating, and began the slow work of untangling my self-worth from the way my family treated me. 2 weeks into February, I received an email at work from a woman named Jessica Taylor, a reporter for the Chicago Tribune. I've been following your story through various social media networks and community forums, she wrote. I'm writing a feature on financial exploitation within families, specifically cases where adult children are systematically used as a source of income by their parents. I believe your experience could help others recognize similar dynamics in their own families. Would you be willing to talk? I deleted the email immediately. I wanted privacy, not more publicity, but an hour later I retrieved it from my bin and read it again. Could help others recognize similar dynamics in their own families. How many other invisible daughters were out there right now working themselves to the bone, propping up their families, accepting scraps, and calling it love? How many were reading about my situation and seeing themselves in it for the first time? I was drafting a polite reply to decline when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Eleanor Hartwell. A woman's voice, professional but urgent. Speaking, my name is Amanda Vickers. I'm a solicitor specializing in cases of financial family abuse. I need to talk to you about your parents, specifically about what they did with your grandmother's estate in 2019. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? That's when my phone buzzed again, a number I didn't recognize, a voice I'd never heard, a story I needed to hear. I'm sorry, I said, trying to process what the solicitor had just said. You'll have to slow down. What about my grandmother's inheritance? Can we meet in person? This is sensitive information, and I'd prefer to discuss it face to face. Amanda Vickers gave me her office address and asked if I could stop by the next day. I agreed, my mind a whirl of questions I didn't yet have the context to properly form. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about my grandmother, the one who had left me the recipe box, while Danielle got the pearl necklace. She died in 2019, and I'd been at the funeral. I stood by the graveside, watching my parents cry, while Danielle clung to my mother's arm. There had been no talk of an inheritance, no reading of a will that I was included in. I'd assumed she'd left everything to my parents, which was normal enough that I hadn't questioned it. The next morning, before my meeting with Amanda Vickers, my phone rang again. This time I recognized the number from the day before, the one I'd initially ignored. I answered, still distracted by thoughts of solicitors and inheritances. Ms. Hartwell. An elderly woman's voice with a slight accent, warm but hesitant. My name is Shu Minglin. You probably don't remember me, but I think I remember you. I'm sorry, I said. I don't think we've met. No, not recently, but I was on CNN last week in the report on family financial abuse. Your face looked so familiar, and when they said your name, they showed old pictures from Cedar Falls. I recognized you. She paused, and I could hear her breath as she gathered her courage. I think you're the girl I helped in 1998. 1998. I would have been 16, still living with my parents, still in sixth form, still years away from understanding just how dysfunctional my family dynamic was. I don't understand. What do you mean, helped? I lived in Cedar Falls, then on Maple Street, 3 houses down from your family. I used to see you at night sitting under the streetlight on the corner doing your homework. Even in the winter, you'd be out there with your books wearing a thin jacket. Her voice softened with the memory. One night I passed you and asked why you weren't studying inside where it was warm. Do you remember what you told me? The memory surfaced slowly like something pulled from the deep ocean. A kind, grey-haired woman who had stopped to talk to me one February night, when my fingers were so cold I could barely hold my pencil. I said my parents said I couldn't waste electricity on homework, that the lights in the house were for family activities, not for me to study. Yes. Mrs. Chen's voice broke a little. You said it so matter-of-factly, as if it were normal, as if you deserved it. And I recognized that look on your face, because I'd worn it myself, decades earlier in Taiwan. I was the strong daughter too, the one who had to work while my younger sisters got to study and marry well. I sat down on the sofa. My meeting with the solicitor was temporarily forgotten. I remember you giving me a thermos of hot tea. You brought it several times that winter. I did more than that. She took a deep breath. That spring, you were accepted to university on a full academic scholarship to the State University. Your guidance counselor called me because I'd spoken to her about you, told her to watch for signs of neglect. She said your parents refused to sign the acceptance forms. They said girls didn't need higher education, that you should stay home and work to help pay for Danielle's activities. The memory of that conversation with my parents was still vivid after all these years. I was standing in the kitchen as my mother explained that university was a waste of time for me, that I was practical and steady, and that A-levels and a full-time job would be enough. Danielle needed their financial support more. Danielle had potential. I ended up going to a community college, I said quietly. I got a scholarship from a church. I never knew which one. It wasn't a church scholarship. Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle. It was me. I contacted the community college, worked with the financial aid department and your guidance counselor. We created a fake scholarship fund. We made it look official and ensured your parents couldn't refuse it, because refusing a gift from God would look bad to their church friends. I paid your tuition for 2 years. After that, you got the federal grant and real scholarships because your grades were so good, and you didn't need me anymore. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was telling me. A stranger had seen me studying under a streetlight and decided I was worth saving, had concocted an entire scholarship to bypass my parents' refusal to let me be educated, had watched from a distance as I built the life they tried to deny me. Why I finally managed to ask, why did you do it? Because I was you 50 years ago. Because no one helped me. And I've spent my whole life wondering what I could have become if they had, because you deserved more than what you were given. She paused. I moved away from Cedar Falls in 2000. I lost touch with you. But when I saw your face on CNN last week talking about feeling invisible in your own family, I knew I had to tell you. You needed to know that someone saw you. Someone always saw you. She saved my life before I even knew I needed saving. But why now Mrs. Chen invited me for tea at her Evanston flat, a modest but elegant space filled with books and photographs, and the kind of careful beauty that spoke of a life deliberately built, piece by piece. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been waiting by the window. The instant I saw her face, something shifted in my chest. Recognition, maybe, or a homecoming. She was smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but her eyes held the same warmth I recalled from those winter nights 26 years ago. "Eleanor," she said, and the way she said my name made it sound important and meaningful, like something worth saying with care. We sat at her dining table with a pot of jasmine tea between us. For the first few minutes, we just looked at each other. She poured the tea with a practical grace, her hands steady, despite her age. "I'm 72 now," she said. "I never married, never had children. For most of my life, I thought that was my failure. My parents certainly believed so. Why didn't you marry?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Because I spent my 20s and 30s caring for my parents in Taiwan. They were traditional. I was the eldest daughter, which meant I was the dutiful one. My younger sisters married well, had children, and built their lives. I stayed home, managed the household, worked in my father's shop, and sent my own money to help with my sisters' children's education. She smiled, but the smile was laced with an old pain. When my parents died, I was 43. My sisters had their own families. They didn't need me anymore. So I immigrated to the United States, where no one knew me, where I could start over. And you built a business. I'd done some research before coming. Simmerling had owned a successful import company for 20 years before retiring. Yes, I did. I discovered I was good at business when I was finally allowed to do it for myself instead of for my family. I made money, built financial security, but I had no one to share it with, no one to pass anything on to. She poured more tea. The steam rose between us like a veil. Then I moved to Cedar Falls for a few quiet years before retirement, and I saw you at 16 studying under a streetlight because your parents wouldn't let you waste electricity. And I saw myself at that age sacrificing everything for a family that would never see me as anything but useful. "You barely knew me," I said. "Why did you care?" "Because you were the daughter I would have had if I had been allowed to have children. Because you reminded me that there are girls all over the world sitting under streetlights, trying to learn, trying to become someone, while their families tell them they're not worth the investment." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was soft, papery thin, warm. I couldn't save myself at 16, but I could save you. I felt the tears welling up, but I held them back. I went to college because of you. I got my associate's degree. Then I transferred to a 4-year university. I got my bachelor's and then my master's. I have a career I love. I'm financially stable. I built a life. I know. Her smile was radiant. I've kept track of you, not closely, not intrusively, but I stayed in touch with people in Cedar Falls. I'd ask about you from time to time when I heard you'd graduated with honours, when I found out you'd moved to London and got a good job. I was proud, the way a mother would be. The tears came then, unstoppable. My real mother had never been proud of me like that. "I know that too," Mrs. Chen said, squeezing my hand. "And I'm sorry you deserved a mother who saw your worth." She paused again. "But Eleanor, I want you to understand something important. That scholarship I gave you wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was an investment. I invested in you because I believed you would take that opportunity and build something extraordinary. And you did. You took my small investment and turned it into a degree, a career, a life lived on your own terms. It's not for that that you should thank me. It is for that that I should thank you. You proved the investment right. You proved that girls like us, the strong daughters, the invisible ones, were not just surviving. We were thriving when given the smallest chance. I cried then in a way I hadn't cried since Christmas. Not tears of anger or betrayal, but of something deeper. Relief, maybe, or validation. Someone had seen me at 16 studying under a streetlight. Someone had believed I was worth investing in. Someone had watched from a distance as I proved them right. I wish I had known, I said through my tears. I wish I could have thanked you properly. You are thanking me now. She stood, came around the table and pulled me into a hug that felt like everything I'd ever needed from my own mother and never received. You are thanking me by being here, by surviving your family, by building a life they said you didn't deserve. That is the greatest thank you I could ever receive. We stood like that for a long moment. Two women separated by decades, but linked by the same wound. The wound of being the strong daughter. The one who had to be reliable because someone had to be the one who was overlooked because she didn't demand attention. The one who gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left. And still her family asked for more. But Mrs. Chen had escaped. And now finally so had I. I finally had the mother I needed, just not the biological one. Danielle showed up at my door on a Tuesday night in early March. This time she looked genuinely broken in a way that couldn't be faked. No makeup, her hair in a messy ponytail, wearing jogging bottoms and a large sweatshirt that seemed designed to hide rather than flatter. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. When I opened the door, she offered no explanation, no apology, just stood there looking small and lost. "Can I come in?" Her voice was barely audible. I stepped aside, cautious but curious. She walked to my sofa and sat down heavily, as if her legs would no longer hold her. I remained standing, arms crossed, waiting. "The edited recording was my father's idea," she said without preamble. "He told me to record our conversation. He said we needed ammunition against you because you were destroying the family. I shouldn't have listened. I shouldn't have posted it. I regret it every single day. But you did post it." "Yes, I did." She looked up at me for the first time. There was no calculation in her eyes, just exhaustion. Marcus's family found out about the recording, about the Christmas money, about everything. They're demanding we postpone the wedding. His mother says she won't support a marriage built on lies and manipulation. Sounds reasonable. They've also pulled their financial support for the wedding. Marcus was going to pay for half, but his parents were covering the other half. Now they're not. And with the Ashworth estate likely to refund our deposit, because of the payment investigation, we have nothing. No venue, no money, no plans. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt nothing. Just a dull acknowledgement that consequences were finally catching up to the people who deserved them. "Why are you telling me this?" She was silent for a long moment, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Then she looked down at those hands. "Because I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between us. I stared at her, processing, and suddenly the oversized sweatshirt made sense. How far along 4 months? I got pregnant in November, right after Marcus proposed. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. That's why my parents were so desperate for the wedding money. They wanted everything done before I started to show. A beautiful Valentine's Day wedding. Gorgeous photos, everything looking perfect and planned. They didn't want people to know I was pregnant beforehand. 4 months. She had been pregnant on Christmas Day, pregnant when she stood in that empty dining room at the riverside, pregnant when she recorded our coffee conversation and turned it into a weapon. Does Marcus know he knows? His family knows. That's why they're demanding we postpone. His mother thinks we rushed into it because of the pregnancy, and she's not wrong. She wants us to take our time to make sure we're really compatible before we legally tie ourselves together. Danielle's hands moved to her stomach, a protective gesture that seemed instinctive. "I'm terrified, Eleanor." "Of what?" "Of becoming a mother." The words came out in a rush. "I'm having a girl, they told me last week. A daughter." And all I can think about is how Mum treated you, how she made you invisible while she made me helpless. What if I do that? What if I look at my daughter and see myself in her and turn her into another Danielle, another pretty useless thing who can't function without constant propping up? It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. So don't. It's not that simple. It's exactly that. Simple. I sat down opposite her, keeping some distance but engaging with her. You know what Mum did wrong. You've seen the damage it caused. You have the information you need to make different choices. The question is whether you'll actually make them. What if I can't? What if it's in my DNA or something? What if I'm just as broken as she is? Trauma isn't genetic. Patterns are learned, which means they can be unlearned. I thought of Mrs. Sheen, of how she broke free from her own family's patterns by leaving everything behind. But it takes work, real work. It's not just about saying you'll be better, it's about actually doing the therapy, making the hard choices, being willing to look at yourself honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. Danielle wiped at her eyes. I want to try. I want to be better. And I had hope. Maybe the baby could bring us together, give us a new beginning as a family. A baby doesn't erase what you did, Danielle. It just means there's a child who deserves better than the toxic pattern we were raised in. I leaned forward. I'm not going to pretend everything's okay just because you're pregnant. I'm not going to ignore the recording, the Christmas dinner, the years of favoritism and neglect just because there's going to be a niece I've never met. I'm not asking you to pretend. Her voice cracked. I'm asking if there's any chance you could ever forgive me. Not now. Maybe not for a long time, but one day. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, genuine fear of becoming the very thing she had benefited from her whole life. Fear of perpetuating the cycle that had damaged us both in different ways. I could forgive, I said slowly, but I can't forget. And I won't pretend that having a baby suddenly makes us a healthy family. Your child deserves better than fake aunts, toxic grandparents, and parents who haven't done the work to break the patterns they inherited. What do I do? She sounded so young suddenly, despite being 32, pregnant and engaged. How do I not become her? You start by being honest with yourself, with Marcus, with your daughter when she's old enough to understand. Don't hide the ugly parts. Don't pretend they don't exist. Don't create golden children or scapegoats. Don't use your children to deal with your own unresolved trauma. She nodded, taking it in. Will you help me? Will you be in her life, even if we're not close? I want her to know there's another way to be. I want her to see a strong, independent woman who didn't need anyone's permission to succeed. I could forgive, but I couldn't forget, and I wouldn't pretend. I'll be in your daughter's life, I said cautiously, but not unconditionally, not without boundaries. Danielle looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. What does that mean? It means I need to see real change, not just words. You need to be in regular therapy, working to understand why you participated in the patterns your mother and father created. Not just saying you're sorry, but actually taking responsibility for your actions, understanding them, and ensuring they don't happen again. I can do that. And Mum and Dad cannot use this baby as a tool for manipulation. They can't hold her emotionally hostage. They can't use access to her as a way to get what they want from us. If they try, you have to be willing to set boundaries with them. Real boundaries, not just lip service. Her face tightened. You're talking about my parents. They're going to be her grandparents. Toxic grandparents create toxic patterns. You asked me how to make sure you don't become like Mum. The first step is to make sure Mum doesn't have unrestricted access to repeat her patterns on another generation. I kept my voice calm, factual. I'm not saying cut them off completely. I'm talking about healthy boundaries, supervised visits if necessary, clear rules about favoritism, financial manipulation, and emotional abuse, disguised as family loyalty. You're making this impossible. I'm being honest. There's a difference. I stood up, suddenly tired of the conversation. You came here asking for help breaking a cycle. But breaking cycles is hard. Danielle, it means disappointing people who expect you to go along with the dysfunction. It means choosing your child's well-being over your parents' comfort. If you're not willing to do that work, then I can't be a part of it. I thought you'd changed. She stood up too, her voice rising. Everyone keeps saying how strong you are now, how you finally stood up for yourself. But you're just being cruel. You're punishing me for being pregnant, for wanting my family in my life, for not being perfect like you. I'm not perfect. I'm just done accepting scraps and calling it love. I walked to the door and opened it. When you're ready to do the real work, call me until then. I can't stand by and watch your daughter go through the same thing we did. She grabbed her handbag and stormed past me. You'll regret this. When my daughter asks why her Aunt Eleanor isn't around, I'll tell her it's because you chose bitterness over family. Tell her the truth, I said quietly. Tell her I chose boundaries over dysfunction. Maybe that will be the most important lesson you ever teach her. She left without another word. I closed the door feeling neither victorious nor guilty, just relieved. Setting boundaries wasn't cruelty, it was survival. 2 days later, my phone rang again, an unknown number. This time when I answered, I recognized the voice immediately. Eleanor, it's Marcus Danielle's fiancé. He sounded exhausted but determined. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Danielle's phone. Is everything all right? That depends on your definition of all right. He gave a humorless laugh. Look, I need to thank you for what you said to Danielle about boundaries therapy and not using the baby as a tool for manipulation. It's what I've been trying to say for months, but I was afraid she'd leave me if I pushed too hard. She told you about our conversation. She told me through tears and anger, but yes, she did. And my mother overheard part of it. She pulled me aside and said, "That sister of hers is the only sane one in that family." He paused. My family has been watching how Danielle's parents operate the favoritism, the financial manipulation, the way they treat you. My mother even called me after Christmas and asked if I'd thought about what it would mean to marry into that dynamic. Smart woman. Yes, she is. She's worried about the baby. Whether Danielle will be able to break free of those patterns or if she's already too enmeshed in them. He took a deep breath. I was wondering if you'd be willing to meet with me and Danielle, not as a mediator exactly, but as someone who understands the family dynamic and can help us figure out what having healthy boundaries actually looks like. Why would I do that? Because I think you care about your niece, even if she isn't born yet. Because you want to break this cycle too. And because, frankly, I need an ally. Someone who won't let Danielle or me or her parents sweep things under the rug when it gets uncomfortable. His voice dropped. I love Danielle, but I will not raise a daughter in the same toxic environment that created the problems we're facing now. If that means postponing the wedding indefinitely, or even calling it off, I'll do it. But I'd rather try to build something healthy first. I thought of Mrs. Shan, of how she had invested in me when I was 16, because she saw something worth saving, of how that one investment had changed my life completely. Maybe I could do the same for this unborn baby, this child who had no say in the family she was being born into. I'll meet with both of you, I said, but I'm not going to soften my position. Boundaries are non-negotiable. I wouldn't want you to, he said, a note of relief in his voice. That's exactly why we need you. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my quiet flat and thought about cycles and patterns and the children who inherit them without their consent. Danielle's daughter would be born into the same family system that had damaged us both. She would have the same grandparents who created golden children and scapegoats, the same potential for favoritism and neglect, and all the subtle ways families break their children while claiming to love them. Maybe the baby would break the cycle, or maybe I was protecting another invisible granddaughter. In my next therapy session, Dr. Chen asked a question that stopped me mid-sentence. Eleanor, what do you need from your parents to move on? I had been talking about the meeting with Marcus and Danielle about boundaries and babies and cycles, but her question brought me back to the central issue I'd been avoiding for months. What did I need from them? An apology, I said automatically, then stopped and really thought about it. No, that's not true anymore. What is true? I sat with the question, searching for the answer inside myself. A month ago, I would have said I needed them to acknowledge what they did, to apologize sincerely, to finally see me and value me the way they'd always valued Danielle. But that desire had been fading, replaced by something quieter and more permanent. I need them to leave me alone, I said finally. I don't need their approval anymore. I don't need their love or their acknowledgement or their consideration. I don't even need them to understand what they did wrong. I just need them to stop expecting me to finance their lives, put up with their treatment, and pretend we're a normal, healthy family. I looked at Dr. Chen. Is that a terrible thing to just want them to go away? It's an honest thing, she said, leaning forward slightly. For most of your life, you've chased their approval, worked for their love, tried to earn a place in their hearts. What you're describing now is indifference. That's not cruelty. That's healing indifference. The word wrapped around me like a blanket. I didn't hate my parents. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just didn't care what they thought of me. And that lack of caring felt like freedom. That same week, I called Jessica Taylor at the Chicago Tribune and told her I would participate in her feature on family financial exploitation. We met at a coffee shop in the city center. She was younger than I expected, in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and a tape recorder she asked permission to use. I want to be clear about my intentions, she said before we began. This isn't about sensationalizing your family's drama. It's about patterns. Financial abuse within families is underreported and underdiagnosed, especially when it targets adult children. Your story can help other people identify those patterns in their own lives. We talked for 2 hours. She asked about the 22 years of sending money home, the Christmas dinner, the insurance policy, but she also asked about the smaller things, the ways they had guilted me for setting boundaries. The implicit expectation that my success meant I owed them a living, the way they framed their requests as family obligation instead of financial exploitation. You're not the first person I've interviewed for this piece, she said when we wrapped up. I've spoken to a dozen other adult children who've experienced similar dynamics. Almost all of them are women. Almost all of them are described by their families as the strong one or the reliable one. It's a pattern. When will the article be published? Early May, barring any unforeseen circumstances. I'll send you a draft before it goes to print so you can check your quotes and the facts. She packed away her recorder. Thank you for trusting me with this. I think it's going to help a lot of people. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived at my flat. I signed for it, curious and a little anxious, and when I opened it, I found the letterhead of a law firm, Morrison and Associates Solicitors, Cedar Falls, Berkshire. My parents had hired a solicitor. The letter was formal and threatening, full of phrases like defamation of character, cease and desist, and potential legal action. They demanded that I stop making false and damaging statements about them to media outlets and on social media platforms. They claimed that my campaign of harassment had damaged their reputation in the community and caused them emotional distress. They threatened to sue me for damages if I went forward with the publication of any article that portrayed them in a negative light. I read the letter twice, then called Rachel, who'd done a law degree before deciding she hated it and becoming a graphic designer. She came over that night, read the letter, and started laughing. "What's so funny?" I asked. "This is the weakest cease and desist I've ever seen. They have no case at all." "Eleanor, truth is an absolute defense against defamation. If what you're saying about them is true and you can prove it, they can't sue you for it." She flipped to the second page. "And you can prove it right. You've got bank statements. The insurance form witness testimony recorded conversations. I have everything documented. Then this letter is pure intimidation. They're hoping you'll get scared and back down. Don't back down." She handed the letter back to me. "You should probably consult a real solicitor, not just your friend who barely passed the bar exam. But in my professional opinion, they're bluffing. They know they did what you're accusing them of. They're just hoping you'll protect them anyway, because that's what you've always done." I looked at the letter again, at my parents' names, typed at the top, at the solicitor's signature at the bottom. They were still trying to control me, still trying to make me responsible for managing their reputation, for protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. They had spent 38 years training me to prioritize their needs over my own, and now that I'd stopped, they were threatening me with a lawsuit. "Let them sue. I said I have documentation, I have witnesses. I have a community of people who have seen exactly how they operate. If they want to make this even more public by filing a lawsuit, that's their choice." Rachel smiled. "That's my girl. But seriously, call a real solicitor just in case." I consulted a solicitor who specialized in family law and financial exploitation cases. She looked over the cease and desist letter, asked a few questions about my documentation, and confirmed what Rachel had said. My parents had no case. The letter was intended to intimidate me into silence. "The interesting thing," the solicitor said, "is that by sending this letter, they've essentially admitted that your claims are specifically about them. If this ever goes to trial, that will play in your favor. Let them sue." I had something better than a solicitor. I had a community. The Chicago Tribune article was published on May 3rd under the headline, "The Invisible Daughters: How Families Exploit Their Most Reliable Children." Jessica Taylor did exactly what she had promised. She focused on the patterns instead of the sensationalism, using my story as a framework, but weaving in research from family therapists and sociologists on scapegoat dynamics and financial exploitation within families. My parents were never named directly, but anyone from Cedar Falls would recognize the details. The article went viral within 48 hours. Women from all over the country shared it on social media with comments like, "This is my family, and I've been living this for 20 years, and I thought I was the only one." The pattern was bigger than I had ever imagined. Thousands of strong daughters, reliable daughters, invisible daughters, all carrying the weight of families that didn't value their strength. 3 days after the article was published, Mrs. She called, "Eleanor, I've done a thing. I hope you don't mind." "What did you do?" "I've set up a GoFundMe campaign. It's called Help the Strong Daughter Get Her Christmas Gift Back. I wrote about how you funded a family celebration and your parents used the money for something else, and how you deserve to have that generosity returned to you." She paused. "We've raised £6,000 in 2 days." I sat down hard on my sofa. "Mrs. Shen, I know you don't need it, but people want to give it to you. They want to show you that they see you, that they value you, that your story matters. Let them." By the end of the week, the GoFundMe campaign had raised £15,000. Women I had never met donated £10, £20, £50, accompanied by comments about their own families and their own experiences as strong daughters. A woman from Oregon donated £1 and wrote, I worked 3 jobs to pay for my sister's university. She never thanked me. This is for both of us. A woman in Florida donated £50 and said, "My parents used my inheritance to fund my brother's business. It went bankrupt. They never apologized. Thank you for speaking out." Then something unexpected happened. A local businesswoman from Cedar Falls named Margaret W., who owned a successful chain of hardware stores in the Midwest, made a single donation of £10,000. Her comment was brief. "I was the strong daughter too. I worked in my father's shop from the time I was 12. I built my own business after he left everything to my brothers." Liana's story is my story. It's every strong daughter's story. This is for all of us. An hour after Margaret's donation, other local businesses started to match contributions. The bakery where I'd worked at 16 donated £500. The community college I'd attended contributed 1,000 individual donors from Cedar Falls who knew my family and had watched the dynamic play out for years. Also voiced their support with pointed comments like, "It's about time someone held the Lozans accountable, and that girl worked harder than anyone I knew." 2 weeks after the article was published, the GoFundMe campaign was closed at £27,000, more than the £15,000 I'd spent on Christmas, enough to make a statement that couldn't be ignored. Mrs. Shen called again. "There's one more thing. The Cedar Falls Community Center wants to host a Women's Empowerment Night next month. They asked if you'd be willing to speak to share your story about breaking generational patterns and setting boundaries with toxic family members." In Cedar Falls, I asked where my parents live, exactly where your parents live. In front of their community, their neighbors, their church members, the people who've been watching all of this unfold. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Your story is going to save someone else's life, Eleanor, just like I tried to save yours 26 years ago. There are women in that town right now who are living what you lived. They need to hear that it's possible to break free." I thought about those women sitting in the audience, probably dragged there by husbands or mothers or daughters, not expecting to hear anything that mattered. And then they heard my story. They heard about the Christmas dinner, the stolen money, the insurance, and the decades of invisibility. They heard that it was possible to say no, to set boundaries, to choose yourself over the family that chose everyone but you. "I'll do it," I said. The event was set for June 15th, almost 6 months to the day since that conversation in the kitchen about serving me leftovers. 6 months since I had walked away from my family's Christmas celebration and created my own. 6 months since I had started the process of becoming visible to myself, even if I would never be visible to them. The community center sent me the details for the event. 7 p.m. expected audience of 200. A 30-minute talk followed by a Q&A. They advertised the event on the local radio, put flyers up in the library and supermarkets, and promoted it through the Chamber of Commerce. My parents would know. They would see the flyers with my name on them. They would hear about it from neighbors and friends, and have to decide whether to show up and confront me publicly or stay home and let my story spread unchallenged through the community that had been their home for 40 years. I was going to tell my story in their town on their turf, and they were going to have to listen. The Cedar Falls Community Center was packed by 6:45 p.m. on June 15th. I had arrived early, slipping in through a side entrance to avoid the crowd that was already gathering at the front door. The event coordinator, a woman named Patricia, who had been kind and professional throughout the planning, met me backstage and offered me water tea, whatever I needed. My hands were shaking too badly to hold a cup. At 7 p.m., Patricia introduced me to polite applause. I walked onto the small stage and looked out at 200 people, mostly strangers, some vaguely familiar from my childhood. And there, in the front row, was Mrs. Shen. She smiled at me, that same warm smile I remembered from those winter nights 26 years ago. and something settled inside me. I started with my childhood, not with names or specific accusations, but with the feeling of being invisible, of studying under streetlights, because using electricity for homework was a waste, of working 2 jobs through sixth form, while I watched my younger sibling focus on activities and dreams, of believing that love had to be earned through sacrifice, and that I just hadn't sacrificed enough yet. The room was silent except for my voice. I talked about that pattern continuing into adulthood, about sending money home for emergencies that were never really emergencies, about showing up to family events, where I existed only on the periphery, about the moment I decided to fund an elaborate Christmas celebration in the hope that it would finally make me visible. It was then that I noticed them halfway through my speech, as I described the conversation I'd overheard about being served leftovers. The back doors opened quietly, and 3 figures slipped in: my mother, my father, and Danielle. They stood near the exit, partially hidden in the shadows, but I knew their silhouettes too well to mistake them. I made brief eye contact with my mother. Her face was pale, drawn. I looked away and kept talking. I told the audience about the Christmas dinner that never was, about discovering my money had funded something else entirely, about the insurance policy that had written me out of even my parents' deaths. I talked about Mrs. Sheen's scholarship, about therapy, about learning that healing meant letting go of the people who would never truly value you. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. I said, my voice steadier now, despite my parents listening from the back of the room. The hardest part was accepting that I had spent 38 years believing I had to earn love, that should have been freely given, that I accepted scraps and convinced myself it was a feast because at least I was at the table. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. But here's what I want you to understand. You deserve the full meal, no leftovers. You deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be prioritized. And if your family can't give you that, and you have every right to build a new family that can. The applause started before I'd even finished my last sentence. It grew in volume, swelling into something powerful and sustained as people got to their feet. The standing ovation lasted for 3 minutes, maybe more. I stood on that stage, overwhelmed, watching 200 people validate everything I had experienced, everything I had felt, everything I had finally had the courage to name. When the talk ended and Patricia opened the floor for questions, hands shot up all over the room. Women stood and shared their own stories of being the strong daughter, the reliable one, the invisible daughter who funded everyone else's dreams. A woman in her 60s cried as she described working to put her brother through medical school while she never finished university herself. A younger woman, maybe in her 30s, talked about realizing she was repeating the same pattern with her own siblings. The local newspaper reporter was there taking notes and snapping photos. The line of people waiting to speak to me afterwards stretched to the back of the room. I listened to story after story, each one a variation on the same theme. Families that took their strong daughters for granted until those daughters finally broke. During the shuffle, I saw movement near the back exit. My parents were slipping quietly out the side door, heads down, shoulders as hunched, trying to make themselves as small as possible. They had heard it all. They had witnessed their community validating my experience. They had seen 200 people stand and applaud my decision to set boundaries they had spent decades trying to erase. They left without speaking to me, without approaching, without defending themselves to anyone who asked. They just disappeared into the June night, like ghosts of the people who raised me. But Danielle didn't leave. She remained seated near the back, watching the crowd of women surrounding me, listening to their stories. Her hand rested on her visibly pregnant stomach, and her face held an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger or defensiveness, but something closer to understanding. An hour later, after the last woman had shared her story, and thanked me after Patricia had locked up and Mrs. Shea had given me one last hug before heading home, I walked back into the now empty community centre to get my things. Danielle was still there, sitting alone in the front row, her hands clasped over her stomach. After the crowd had cleared, there was only one person left. My sister, and she was ready to tell me the truth. "I'm going to name her Mingling," Danielle said without preamble, her hand resting protectively on her very pregnant belly. "After Mrs. Shen. If you'll tell me her Chinese name, and if she gives us permission." I stared at my sister. This woman I'd spent my life resenting and pitying in equal measure. Why? Because she saved you when our parents were destroying you. And you are the only example of real strength I have ever known. Danielle's voice was steady and clear. "I moved out of Mum and Dad's house last week. Marcus's parents are letting us stay with them until we find our own place. I'm in therapy twice a week, and I want my daughter to grow up knowing her Aunt Eleanor, knowing what it means to choose yourself when everyone tells you to keep sacrificing." For the first time in my life, my sister was seeing me. Really seeing me not as a convenient cash machine, the bitter older sister or the family disappointment, but as someone worth emulating, someone worth knowing, someone worth naming a child after even indirectly. "Mrs. Shen would be honored," I said quietly, "and so would I." 3 months later, I sat in a solicitor's office and signed the papers establishing the Strong Daughters Fund, a non-profit organization that provides microgrants to young women trapped in financially abusive family situations. The £27,000 raised on GoFundMe became the seed money for educational expenses, the first month's rent for those escaping toxic homes, and therapy costs for those just starting their healing journey. Our first recipient was Maya Rodriguez, a 19-year-old from Cedar Falls, whose parents controlled her wages from the restaurant where she worked full-time. She wanted to go to nursing school, but couldn't save any money because her parents took everything she earned. We gave her £5,000 for her first semester. She cried when we told her. I saw myself at her age and felt something break open in my chest, the realization that my pain had become someone else's lifeline. That December, I hosted Christmas dinner in my flat, a small gathering around my dining table that I had extended with a folding leaf. Mrs. Sheen sat at the head of the table with tiny Mingling asleep in her arms, while Daniel and Marcus held hands and looked happier than I had ever seen them. Rachel was there, as were Patricia from the community centre, and 2 women I'd met through the Strong Daughters Fund, who had become my friends. My parents weren't invited. They sent a card that I left unopened on the counter. I looked around the table at these people who had chosen to see me, who had built this makeshift family out of intention, not obligation, and I raised my glass. "To the family that sees you," I said, "and to the self that sees you," everyone raised their glasses. Mrs. Shen smiled at me with the maternal pride I had never felt contrary to my own mother's approval. Danielle cried happy tears, holding her daughter close. The table was filled with laughter, real food, and genuine warmth. No one was relegated to a side table. No one ate leftovers. No one was invisible. I didn't cancel Christmas. I reclaimed it, and this time everyone got the full meal. If Eleanor's story felt familiar, know that you are not alone. There are thousands of invisible daughters watching this right now, recognizing their own families in her journey. The strong daughter who funds everyone else's dreams, the reliable one who is taken for granted, the scapegoat who finally said enough. This isn't just Eleanor's story, it might be yours too. I want to hear from you in the comments. Are you the strong daughter in your family? Have you experienced financial exploitation disguised as family obligation? What boundaries have you set, or what boundaries do you wish you could set? Your story matters. Your experience is valid, and sharing it might help another invisible daughter realize she's not crazy. She's not selfish. She's just finally choosing herself. If this video helped you see your situation more clearly, subscribe to the channel. We tell the stories of real people breaking toxic patterns and taking back their lives. Turn on notifications so you don't miss a story that might help you. And remember what Lena learned. You deserve the full meal, no leftovers. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.